Chapter 888. Led by Grand Tutor Chu, several famous scholars in the capital are no longer just asking for the King of Shu to return and take charge of the Eastern Palace. In the past 2 days, there have been rumors among the officials they influence that you are the sycophant who obstructed the peace talks between the Qi and Jing kingdoms, stirring up a foul atmosphere in the court. Li Yi didn't continue her words. Instead, he asked, "Tomorrow is the 13th. How are the preparations going?" Mingzi nodded and said, "Father has already personally issued the edict. It can be announced at any time. You can arrange the time yourself." Then, she frowned and looked at him. "If you really had any ideas, you should have told me in advance. Their target this time is you. Don't always look so indifferent." "It doesn't matter if I didn't," Li Yi said somewhat helplessly. "The Chu family has been caught red-handed, so we have no choice but to work hard. In terms of influence in the imperial court, all of us combined are no match for that Grand Tutor. If they want to talk, let them talk. We can't shut their mouths." Mingzi was startled. She asked in confusion, "What blackmailed the Chu family?" "The Chu family?" Li Yi had just opened his mouth when he suddenly looked at Li Xian, who was standing to the side. He asked, "Is there something on my face?" "No." Li Xian shook his head without hesitation. "Then why do you keep looking at me?" Li Xian shrugged. "Other than you and Mingzi, there are only the two of you here. If I don't look at you, am I supposed to look at myself?" It was one thing to look, but to look for an hour and mumble while looking was quite abnormal. He glanced at Li Xian and said to Mingzi, "Let's go over there and talk." On the bustling streets of the capital, the goddess of Luo Shui tilted her head and looked at Li Yi. She asked in confusion, "Where are we going?" Li Yi said casually, "We have nothing to do anyway. Let's just walk around." Xingzumo looked at him and asked, "Do you remember what day it is today?" Li Yi was puzzled. "April 13th, what's wrong?" "It's nothing." She shook her head and looked ahead. She pointed and said, "There's a new jewelry shop over there. Let's go take a look." The goddess of Luo Shui wasn't in a good mood today. Along the way, she didn't buy anything. She lowered her head and was lost in her thoughts. Only when the two of them were far away from the bustling city and there were fewer and fewer people around them did she finally come back to her senses. She looked around and looked at Li Yi. She asked doubtfully, "Why did we walk here?" Li Yi raised his head and looked at the plaque above the gate, which read, "Xing Residence." He held her hand and smiled, "Let's go in." Xingzumo's body almost subconsciously paused. This used to be the place she was most familiar with, but also the place she was most unfamiliar with. It had carried her sweetest and happiest memories and was also the beginning of the longest nightmare she had ever had. She held Li Yi's hand tightly and looked back at him. Their eyes met for a moment. Then she turned back and let out a long sigh. She nodded and said, "Let's go." The two of them stepped on the stone steps. Li Yi pushed the door open. The heavy wooden door made a creaking sound, revealing a dozen figures behind the door. "Uncle Ho." Xingzumo looked at the old man who was bowing at the front. After a moment of daze, she looked back with surprise on her face. "Uncle Qi, Nanny Hua, Xiao Mei, you are Xiao Mei. How did you, miss?" The dozen people all bowed. The old man at the front raised his head and said with a smile, "Miss, welcome home." Her mind was blank. Holding Li Yi's hand, she was led into the Xing residence by him. Only then did she realize that this place was completely different from the last 2 times she had been here. More than a decade ago, when she was still in the Xing residence, there should be a stone pavilion on the left side of the garden. Whenever it rained, she didn't want to stay in the stuffy room. She would sit in the stone pavilion, watching the mist in the sky and listening to the pitter-patter of rain. She didn't see the stone pavilion the last 2 times she came to the Xing residence. It must have been torn down. This time, it miraculously appeared in front of her eyes. Whether it was in the position or the direction it was facing, it was exactly the same as she remembered. The previous 2 times she saw a few small houses that didn't exist for more than a decade. They must have been built in recent years. This time, they disappeared as well, and an empty space under the wall reappeared. A long time ago, when the weather was fine, she would play shuttlecock with the maids in the Xing residence. In the entire Xing residence, she was the only one who could play shuttlecock without hitting the ground after 100 times. The decoration in the front hall was also very different from the last time. Tables, chairs, screens. These things began to overlap with the Xing residence in her memory. This was the Xing residence, the only Xing residence in her heart. She looked at Li Yi and wanted to ask him something. However, Li Yi had already pulled her into his arms and whispered in her ear, "This is your birthday present. Do you like it?" Only then did she realize what he meant when he asked her, "Do you like it here?" The last time they came to the Xing family's house, he asked her, "Do you like it here?" She didn't know how he got the Xing residence from those people. She only knew that this was his birthday present for her, and that was enough. The imperial edict has arrived. A sharp and piercing voice suddenly rang out from outside. She hurriedly escaped from Li Yi's embrace and saw 2 fair-skinned, beardless men walking in. The eunuch glanced at them and said coldly, "His Majesty has an edict. Kneel and accept it." Whoosh! Other than Li Yi and Xing Zumo, all the servants of the Xing residence knelt on the ground and didn't dare to raise their heads in fear. Xing Zumo was about to kneel as well, but Li Yi grabbed her wrist and glared at the eunuch. The eunuch shivered and immediately put on a smile that was uglier than crying. He quickly said, "Miss, you don't have to kneel. His Majesty specifically said that the court has wronged Sir Zhang. Miss, just stand and listen." He opened the edict and said in a loud voice, "The edict reads, the previous Minister of Revenue, Xing Shiji, was loyal and dutiful. He worked hard and made great contributions. However, he was framed by a villain and the court misjudged him. Now that the investigation has been carried out, we should set things right. Reward the Xing clan with 10,000 gold and 1,000 bolts of silk. The Xing clan will be restored. Sir Zhang was wronged and will be posthumously conferred the title of Marquis of Loyalty." After reading it, he looked up anxiously and said, "Miss Zhang, please accept the edict." Seeing that she was standing there in a daze, Li Yi took the edict. The 2 eunuchs sighed in relief and left immediately. Li Yi held the imperial edict, looked at her, and said in a low voice, "The imperial edict begins with the imperial edict. It is meant to announce to the world that the Xing family was wrongly accused, and the world will return their innocence to them." She looked up with tears in her eyes. This is also your..." Li Yi wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes and said softly, "This is the second gift I'm giving you." As soon as he finished speaking, his lips were kissed by her. It wasn't a light touch like before. Her tongue pried open his teeth. Although the movement was jerky, it was wild and passionate like never before. The servants of the Xing clan had already left. When Xing Shichen came in, he happened to see this scene. Ahem. After standing there for a long time, he finally couldn't help but cough. Ah! The goddess of Luo Shui was like a frightened rabbit. She pushed Li Yi away in a hurry and clasped her hands together. She said helplessly, "Second uncle, clang." Xing Shichen felt like he was struck by lightning. The thing in his hand fell to the ground. Chapter 889. Xing Shichen hurriedly picked up a box from the ground and put it on the table. "This is the contract of Steward Ho and the others. From now on, let them stay here." The blush on Xing Zumo's face hadn't disappeared. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at anyone. "Thank you, second uncle." Hearing this title again after so many years, Xing Shichen couldn't hide the joy on his face. He also let out a long sigh of relief. She was willing to call him second uncle, which meant that she had let go of the knot in her heart from 13 years ago. This was also the knot in his heart that he couldn't let go of for a long time. Then, "I'll leave first." Tsing Shichen looked at them, especially at Li Yi's face, for a long time. He then turned around and left, closing the door on his way out. The Luo Shui goddess still had her head down. Li Yi sat on the chair and pulled her over. "He's gone, let's continue." "Continue what?" The Luo Shui goddess's voice was almost inaudible. Li Yi didn't answer. Instead, he used his actions to tell her what to continue. After an unknown amount of time, she lazily leaned against Li Yi's chest. Her eyes were blurred as she murmured, "Do you still remember what it was like when we first met?" Li Yi grabbed her hand and said, "At that time, I also grabbed your hand like this, and you still thought I was a lecher. You are a lecher." Xing Zumo removed her hand from his waist and said with a blush, "So be it. It's good to be a lecher." Li Yi put his hand back and said shamelessly. She symbolically struggled for a while before letting him be. She murmured, "I still remember that time in the Jade courtyard. You rushed up from below the stage and asked me if I had transmigrated from Earth. From then on, I was curious. What is Earth, and what is transmigration?" Now that Li Yi thought about it, he found it a little funny. Not long after he came to this world, he happened to hear someone singing Immortal Magpie Bridge, which only existed in another world. Naturally, he was surprised and happy, but in the end, it was just a misunderstanding. However, if not for that beautiful misunderstanding, there would be no such scene. He couldn't help hugging her tightly and said with a smile, "It's a secret. She grew up here and naturally had an unforgettable feeling for this place." When the two walked out of the room, Li Yi had already discussed with her. They would go back to Willow Lane to tidy up and move here with Wan and Ruoqing in a few days. She had never dared to do something like that before. Moreover, she did it in front of these people whom she had known since she was young. Therefore, after she walked out of the room, she blushed and lowered her head. Especially when she saw Tsing Shichen standing in front of her, even her white and tender neck was covered with a layer of pink. This time, the Chui family's target is not only the king of Shu, but also you. Tsing Shichen glared at him vaguely before saying, "It may not be peaceful in the near future. Be careful." Tsing Zumo looked at Li Yi worriedly and asked, "Are they going to do something bad to you?" Li Yi helped her tidy up her slightly messy hair and said, "Don't worry. Who do you think your husband is? The Chui family is more than 1,000 years too early to make trouble for me. Now is not the time. No matter what happens, it's best to wait and see." Tsing Shichen looked at him and said, "The Chu family's influence is too wide. If you can't kill them in one strike, there will be endless trouble. Now is not the time for you to act." Tsing Shichen said it was not the right time. Li Yi could naturally understand. For example, Grand Tutor Chu's precious grandson had some strange hobbies and was related to the missing girl some time ago. But because he was the grandson of the Chu family, he was secretly let go. If this matter was revealed at a normal time, it would at most affect the Chu family's reputation a little. With Grand Tutor Chu around, the Chu family could still stand tall. However, if he was the happiest person in the Chu clan and used the clan's accumulated reputation to do something, it would be like a sharp blade that could destroy the foundation of the clan. Moreover, if they didn't drag things out, who knew who else would jump out at the crucial moment in court? In a pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li Yi was teaching Yongning how to fish. She had almost completely integrated into this world. After all, she was still young and her worldview had not formed. When she grew older, she probably wouldn't have a clear impression of the other world. "How can you still sit here?" Li Xian walked over from behind and said with a frown, "News just came from the palace. The court is almost in an uproar." Even Uncle Huang was alarmed and went straight to the Great Hall. "You're actually fishing here? Then what can I do?" Li Yi glanced at him and said, "Fight with those old scholars. Won't they have another reason to impeach me? The matter of your impeachment has already been suppressed by Mingsu." Li Xian shook his head and said, "In court, led by Grand Tutor Chu and accompanied by 4 scholars, those people are jointly asking Uncle Huang to issue an edict to transfer the king of Shu back to the capital." Li Yi held Yongning's small hand and helped her stabilize the fishing rod. He then gently pulled it up and a fat carp jumped out of the water. The little girl let go of the fishing rod and shook Li Yi's arm. She said excitedly, "Brother, a fish has taken the bait." Li Yi patted her head and said with a smile, "This fish, I'll make fish soup for Yongning later, in the Great Hall." His Majesty had just lost his temper. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was heavy and deathly silent. Grand Tutor Chu looked up and got up from his chair. Leaning on his walking stick, he moved step by step to the center of the Great Hall. "His Majesty's body is unwell. It's best to appoint a crown prince as soon as possible to establish the foundation of the country and settle the hearts of the people. The King of Shu is the son of concubine Cui and is also His Majesty's eldest son. He has a respected status and is in line with the ancestral rules. He is the best candidate to live in the East Palace." He covered his mouth and coughed a few times. He put down his walking stick, cupped his fists and bowed. He said loudly, "Your Majesty, please summon the King of Shu back to the capital." Among the hundreds of officials, 4 white-haired old men walked out and stood behind Grand Tutor Chu. They bowed deeply and said loudly, "Your Majesty, please summon the King of Shu back to the capital." In the Great Hall, many officials looked at each other and walked out. "Your Majesty, please summon the King of Shu back to the capital." "Your Majesty, please summon the King of Shu back to the capital." "Your Majesty, please summon the King of Shu back to the capital." Everyone's voices resounded throughout the hall. Even though there were a few different voices, they were quickly drowned out. Cui Qingming was also in the crowd with a smile on his face. "They don't look like courtiers at all." In front of the crowd, Prime Minister Shen's face darkened. He said angrily, "What are they doing? They are forcing the emperor to abdicate." Seeing this, Qin Xiang shook his head with a complicated expression. Emperor Jing slowly rose from his throne and looked down. His gaze finally stopped on Grand Tutor Chu's face. His chest rose and fell slightly as he slowly said, "Grand Tutor, are you forcing us?" "I dare not force your Majesty." Grand Tutor Chu lifted his head, his gaze calm. "I'm doing this for the world, for the people of the Jing Kingdom, and for His Majesty." He tidied up his robe, knelt on the ground, and said loudly, "Your Majesty, please issue the decree. Your Majesty, please issue the decree. Your Majesty, please issue the decree." The sound waves grew louder and louder, as if they were going to overturn the roof of the Great Hall. Emperor Jing revealed a sorrowful expression. He pointed downwards and murmured, You all." Changde immediately stepped forward and said anxiously, "Your Majesty, the dragon's body is more important." Mingsu quickly walked over from the side and said, "Bring Imperial Father to rest first." After a few eunuchs accompanied Emperor Jing and left, she walked down the steps and looked at Grand Tutor Chu and asked, "Grand Tutor, how long are you going to kneel for?" Grand Tutor Chu raised his head and said expressionlessly, "As long as His Majesty does not issue the decree, this old man will not get up." Chapter 890. Li Yi and Li Xian were waiting outside the hall. When an imperial physician came out, Li Xian quickly walked over and asked anxiously, "How is Uncle Huang?" The imperial physician sighed and shook his head. Li Xian's expression changed. He grabbed his collar and asked, "Is it serious?" "Why do you say that, Your Highness?" The imperial physician was surprised and said, "His Majesty was just temporarily stimulated. His mood was too unstable, causing his condition to relapse." Li Xian relaxed and glared at him. "Then why did you shake your head just now?" "My neck was a little stiff just now, so I moved it a little." The imperial physician sighed and then said, "However, you still have to pay more attention in the future. His Majesty's condition really can't take any more stimulation. Get out, get out, get out." Li Xian kicked the imperial physician's buttocks and waved his hand impatiently. After the eunuch reported, the two entered the hall. Emperor Jing was lying on a soft couch inside and waved at them from a distance. Li Xian quickly walked over and said, "Uncle Huang, the dragon's health is more important. You can let Emingzu handle these matters of the court. If they want to kneel, let them kneel until they die in the hall. It will save us some trouble." What a stupid thing to say. Prince Ning glared at him and said, "If the current Grand Tutor of the court kneels until he dies in the Golden Hall, how will the world talk about His Majesty?" "I don't mind." Emperor Jing shook his head and looked at Li Yi. He said, "You have been wronged. What you have done is beneficial to the country and the people. It is a good deed that will last for generations, but you are regarded as a sycophant." Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing's pale face and said, "Whether it is a good deed or a bad deed, the future generations will judge. Moreover, the people are not stupid. They can't be toyed with as they like. I believe that the world will naturally give me justice." Seeing the fatigue on his face, Li Xian stood up and said, "Uncle Huang, please rest well. We won't disturb you any longer." After leaving the hall, the smile on Li Xian's face immediately disappeared. He said angrily, "Are these old fellows trying to force me to abdicate and rebel?" Li patted him on the shoulder and said, "You just can't stay calm when something happens. Don't worry, let's go and take a look first." In the main hall, Emperor Jing covered his chest and coughed a few times before slowly saying, "I can feel that I don't have much time left." Pain appeared in King Ning's eyes. "Imperial brother," Emperor Jing looked out of the hole. After a long time, he said, "At first, I also thought that you should take this position." Without waiting for him to finish, Prince Ning immediately bowed. "Imperial brother, you must not do this. We know that you don't want to be trapped in this position. Otherwise, the one lying here right now would be you." Emperor Jing narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "In the end, this world should belong to those young people." Prince Ning nodded and said, "Emingzu and Xian did not disappoint us. The Cui family has the ambition of wolves." Emperor Jing looked at Prince Ning again. "This time, I'm afraid you will have to personally go back to Qing and Fu." Prince Ning bowed and said in a low voice, "As you command." When Li Yi and Li Xian walked to the main hall, they coincidentally ran into Emingzu coming out from inside. She asked, "What's the situation inside?" Emingzu shook her head and said, "With Grand Tutor Chu as the leader, there are more than 20 people still kneeling inside." Li Yi walked into the main hall and saw that other than the group of people kneeling on the ground, the other officials had already left. The elder at the very front was kneeling on the ground. He must be the Grand Tutor Chu that he had met twice. He walked to the front. Grand Tutor Chu heard the sound of footsteps and slowly raised his head. Li Yi hurriedly waved his hand and said, "Grand Tutor, there is no need to be so courteous. Please rise. I really cannot accept such a great courtesy from you. How dare you? How dare you?" Before Grand Tutor Chu could speak, a series of harsh voices came from behind him. The 4 scholars looked at him angrily. The officials of the court behind him all shrank their necks and did not say a word. Grand Tutor Chu's expression was calm as he lightly said, "I kneel for the world and the ancestral system. When the emperor is ill, the Eastern Palace should be established to stabilize the court and the people. This is the rules set by the ancestors. Do you really want to be a treacherous official who disregards the ancestral system and causes trouble for the world? Such a heavy crime, this junior can't afford to bear it." Li Yi shook his head and bent down. In a small voice, he said, "I am only worried that your grandson, a young man in the prime of his youth, will injure his legs if he kneels for too long. Grand Tutor, you are already so old. If something bad happens to you and you collapse, I presume that official Chui, who does not wish to reveal his name, will be very sad. The old man looked at him and his gaze suddenly froze. What did you say? Li Yi looked at him and asked, forming a clique for personal gain and pressuring the emperor in the Golden Palace. Is this the righteousness that Grand Tutor, as a scholar of the Jing Kingdom? Grand Tutor Chu's gaze slightly froze. He coldly said, My righteousness is not for you to judge. Grand Tutor's reputation is illustrious. Naturally, I cannot judge. Li Yi once again lowered his voice and slowly said, I wonder if those women who have been trampled upon by your grandson, who have been seriously injured in both body and mind, can be judged. You. Grand Tutor Chu's expression changed. He stood up shakily with the help of his walking stick and pointed it at Fan Xian. In a trembling voice, he said, You traitor, don't you dare sully the Chu family's clean name. The Chu family's clean name for 100 years is not easy to obtain. Grand Tutor, please reconsider. Don't casually use it to gamble. Li Yi shook his head and turned to leave. The people in the hall looked at the dazed Grand Tutor Chu and looked at each other. An old man finally could not help but ask, Grand Tutor. Grand Tutor Chu waved his hand and said, Get up. We will discuss this matter at length when we return. Watching the people leave the hall from afar, Li Xian asked in confusion, What did you say to that old man? Li Yi watched the group leave and said, I told him that the old man's body is weak and that kneeling for too long is not good for his health. That's all. What else? Li Yi shook his head and said, This is for his own good. If he still does not listen, then he can only blame himself. Li Xian shook his head and said resolutely, Impossible. That old man is as stubborn as a rock. Let alone kneeling until his legs are broken, even if he kneels to death, he will not easily compromise. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Fine. Actually, I told him that His Highness said that if they do not get up, they will all be beheaded and hung at the palace gates as lanterns. The Chu family will be exterminated, the men will be exiled and the women will be sold to the brothels. They will not be allowed to sleep without receiving 100 customers a day. Just ask him if he is afraid. Li Xian was stunned and murmured, Isn't this too cruel? Li Yi patted his shoulder again and said, If you are not so cruel, they will not be afraid. Outside the palace gates, Cui Qingming slowly followed behind Grand Tutor Chu and said, Don't worry, Grand Tutor. All the evidence of that incident has already been destroyed. What he said is nothing more than slanderous slander and framing others. No matter what he does now, even if he finds those women and points them out, people will only think that he is desperate and will not be able to do anything. His eyes flickered and he said firmly, Now that the situation has been decided, as long as Grand Tutor puts in a little more effort, the great event will be possible. Chapter 891. Jingdu had always been a troublesome place, but too many things had happened in recent days. First, a fugitive killed someone on the Lantern Festival in a cruel way. Then, a woman near Jingdu disappeared inexplicably. The wanted poster of the fugitive had been posted all over Jingdu, but there was no result until now. The case of the missing woman was solved, but it was not perfect. 2 other women had not been found. Later, the envoy of the Qi kingdom came from afar to negotiate for peace. It was publicized quite enthusiastically for 2 days, but there was no news about it after that. In the middle of April, it was said that led by the Grand Tutor and several famous scholars forced the emperor to issue an edict to summon the king of Shu, the eldest son of the emperor, back to Jingdu and live in the East Palace. Everyone knew why the king of Shu was expelled from Jingdu at that time. If he had taken another step forward, it would have been a great crime equivalent to rebellion. Merely being expelled was already a mercy beyond the law. It was said that on that day in the hall, His Majesty was so angry that his old illness relapsed. The Grand Tutor and the others knelt in the hall and refused to get up. They did not know what happened after that. In any case, the imperial edict to summon the king of Shu back had not been issued. However, it was faintly heard that the Grand Tutor Chu and those scholars were going to carry out some activities to clean up the side of the emperor, aiming at the Minister of Honor, Li, County Marquis Li, who was the most favored by the emperor. Everyone knew that County Marquis Li and the princess had done a lot of good things for the world and helped many people live a good life. However, this kind of thing was planned by the scholars in the upper class. They couldn't participate in it at all. Of course, they wouldn't participate in it. After all, this matter was led by the Grand Tutor, who was like a saint in the hearts of the people. Even those who were very firm in heart couldn't help but be shaken when thinking of this. This was a game between the bigwigs, and they could only watch from afar. What was strange was that no matter how the opponent slandered, County Marquis Li didn't do anything, which made it difficult for countless people to guess. After all, this matter didn't only involve himself. Even the officials and forces in Jingdu who had some relations with him were greatly affected because of this matter. In the government office of the capital, County Magistrate Liu was having a headache because of a street fight. Fighting was just a small matter, but when the people involved in the fight, one was a member of the Chui family, and the other was just a commoner, and the Chui family was not in the right, the matter was a little difficult to deal with. In front of the hall, an old man revealed a smile and said, "Hee, Lord Liu, how should this case be judged? Please quickly give us a definite answer. My young master will have a banquet in a while." County Magistrate Liu couldn't remember when was the last time someone talked to him like this in the court. Could it be that this housekeeper of the Chui residence thought that since Lord Li was at a disadvantage, the Chui family could be more arrogant in the capital? He looked at the disdainful young man standing in the middle of the hall, waved his hand and said, "Fighting in the street, disregarding the law. You will be punished with 10 strokes of the cane and driven out of the county government." In the court, the young man's expression changed, and he shouted, "How dare you!" The old man was startled, and his face also became gloomy. He said in a low voice, "Lord Liu, don't forget who my young master is, and don't forget who you are. What a coincidence. I'm not afraid of threats at all, especially threats from your Chui family." County Magistrate Liu smiled and said, "This man disturbed the court and dared to threaten me. For the sake of your age, I won't beat him. Just throw him out as well." Seeing the government runners drag the two people out, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He clenched his fists, looked at the sky, and murmured, "Lord Li, what are you thinking?" His face alternated between doubt, hesitation, worry, and fear. After a while, all kinds of complex emotions turned into determination. He walked out of the hall and ordered a government runner, "Prepare the carriage, I need to go out. Shaning, move a little to the right, hold Yongning, hold her, not her head. Never mind, put your hand on her shoulder." Li Yi instructed the proud Lolita, and then picked up the brush again, and drew on the spread paper. The weather was good today, and he originally planned to draw a family portrait. Rui was holding Li Duan, Xiao Huan and Rui were standing on her side, and finally he would Photoshop himself, and this family portrait would be perfect. However, the proud Lolita came over, and she insisted on joining in. With her, of course, Yongning, so the small family became a big family. The little guy couldn't stay quiet for long. After a while, he started to cry and make a fuss. Rui had to coax him. Fortunately, her part had been finished. As long as he added others, it would not be difficult for him. After finishing the painting, he sent the proud Lolita and Yongning to play, and then he had time to lie in the yard, enjoying a moment of peace. Not long after he closed his eyes, a pair of hands appeared on his shoulders, gently massaging him. Rui's voice was soft, "I've heard about the things that are spreading outside." Li Yi opened his eyes and asked in surprise, "What is it?" "They say that hubby is a sycophant." Li Yi sighed and said, "I thought I hid it well, but I never expected them to see through me. In fact, from a certain point of view, Old Man Chu and company were right. At the very least, he had hidden the fact that he wanted to make Princess Royal Empress from the old emperor. If one were to really think about it, compared to this treasonous matter, what the Chui family did was nothing. Rui wasn't surprised by his words. After some thought, she said solemnly, "If hubby is a sycophant, then I'm the wife of the sycophant. When the sycophant and his wife join forces, there's no one to be afraid of." Li Yi grabbed her hand and said with a smile, "Don't worry. One sycophant is enough to deal with these people. The sycophant's son is crying again. It's best you coax the sycophant's wife." Rui went to coax the restless Li Duan. Mississippi Lu walked over from behind and stood in front of him. She looked down at him and asked, "How much longer are you going to wait?" Lying on the recliner to look at Mississippi Lu, he felt like he was looking up at her. Li Yi shook his head and said, "Those are all great Confucian scholars. In terms of influence, I can't compare to them." I have an idea. Rui, why don't you visit those stubborn old fogies one by one at night? You don't have to beat them to death. All you have to do is beat them until they are paralyzed and unable to take care of themselves. That way, they won't be able to run around stirring up trouble, all right. Mississippi Lu simply agreed. The next moment, she disappeared in front of Li Yi. Suddenly losing sight of Mississippi Lu, Li Yi was startled. He immediately jumped up from the rocking chair and chased after her. He shouted, "Wait a minute. Let's discuss it again. Maybe there's another way." He didn't catch up with Mississippi Lu. Instead, he saw Li Xian and the eldest princess who came together. When the three of them walked back in, someone also came out from another high door. A middle-aged man said apologetically, "Prime Minister Qin, I'm really sorry. My father hasn't been feeling well recently and is resting in bed. He won't see anyone." Prime Minister Qin looked at the two carriages parked in front of the Chu residence. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the middle-aged man and said lightly, "I have something to say. Tell the Grand Tutor that Qin Wen is grateful for his teaching back then. But today, he wants to destroy the pillar of the Jing kingdom." "I beg to differ." Inside the hall, Li Yi had just asked Li Xian and the eldest princess to sit down. Before the tea was served, Fong walked in from outside and said, "Marquis, Lord Tseng is here. Tseng Shichen should be here soon." Li Yi nodded and said, "Invite him in." Tseng Shichen was wearing casual clothes today. When he walked into the hall, he looked up and was stunned at first. Then, he immediately bowed and said, "Tseng Shichen greets the princess and the crown prince." Chapter 892. As though he hadn't expected the princess and the crown prince to be present, Tseng Shichen lowered his head and drank his tea without saying a word. Li Xian glanced at him and raised his brows. "Sir, is there something you need?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Ignore Lord Tseng for now. Speak your mind." Li Xian looked at him before looking at Tseng Shichen. He seemed to understand something before he frowned and asked, "You actually asked me what I need? Don't you know why we're here?" Li Yi shook his head. "Why? Let me make this clear. If the Academy of Sciences runs out of funds, don't look for me. Look for Emingzu to borrow it. My family has high expenses. She can't even spend her money. Purge the emperor's side." Li Xian slapped the table and said, "That old man Chu has taken the lead to purge the emperor's side on behalf of Uncle Huang. He wants to get rid of the sycophants, but you're still sitting here drinking tea." He said angrily, "Although old man Chu is respected and the Chu family has an extraordinary influence in the world of officials, making it nearly impossible to find any flaws, you can't just sit here and wait for death. It's not like I can't find any flaws." Tseng Shichen put down his teacup, looked at Li Xian, and said, "Your Highness, you may not know this, but in the case of the missing woman case that was solved a few days ago, Grand Tutor Chu's grandson was captured on the spot at the Ping residence. It was only because someone exerted some influence that the case was left unsettled." Li Yi and Emingzu didn't look surprised. Instead, it was Li Xian who was taken aback. He stood up abruptly and asked, "Something like that happened?" Tsing Shichen nodded. When he saw Li Yi and the princess's expressions, he knew that the Cui family had been too naive the previous time. Even if he didn't say anything, he wouldn't be able to hide it from them. Li Xian frowned as he paced around the hall. He muttered, but this alone isn't enough to topple the Chu family. It won't be a good thing if we anger old man Chu. That old fellow even said something about scholarly bones. What bullsh *t scholarly bones? What if we add a murder case? Tsing Shichen stood up and said, unfortunately, the murder at the Miaoying Pavilion on the night of the Lantern Festival is also related to that young Master Zhu. That murder case had caused an uproar in the capital, but it had still not been solved. Li Xian also had some impression of it. He asked, what do you mean? Didn't you say that the criminal originally wanted to harm the grandson of Grand Tutor Chu as well? You mean that the case was originally done by that person surnamed Chu? Li Xian walked up to him and asked, if that's the case, why hasn't there been any news at all? That's because the capital governor, Tsing Shichen, with the tacit approval of Grand Tutor Chu, concealed the truth of the case and framed a fugitive who was on the run. In addition, that woman's older sister felt that there was something fishy about the case and went to the capital governor's yamen to seek justice. To this day, she is still imprisoned in the yamen. Li Xian was startled. Confusion and shock appeared on his face. He pointed at him and said, you aren't you Tsing Shichen? Tsing Shichen straightened his clothes and knelt down in the direction of the eldest princess. In a loud voice, he said, I have sinned. You. Li Xian pointed at him and was so shocked that he couldn't say anything. In the end, he could only choke out, you traitor, you betrayed me well. So that's why you locked that woman up. Li Yi stood up as well. He looked at him and asked, why didn't you tell me about this before? Tsing Shichen raised his head and slowly said, the time has not come. And Mingzi gazed at him and asked, do you know what the crime is? Tsing Shichen lowered his head and said, no matter what the crime is, it's still much better than following the Cui family down a dead end. And Mingzu looked at him and waved her hand. Stand up and talk. After listening to Tsing Shichen's words, Her Highness shook her head and said, no wonder. No wonder he was so radical. Grand Tutor Chu had no other way to protect the Chu family's reputation. Li Xian slammed the table and said angrily, the Cui family actually used such despicable methods. Why didn't they tell old Chu about this? Tsing Shichen shook his head and said, the Chu family can no longer turn back. Whether it was the Cui family's scheme or not, the case was committed by Chu Ping. The Cui family has been uninvolved from the beginning. It's impossible to topple such a powerful family with just one side of the story. Moreover, the capital is deep. The Cui family is not as simple as the crown prince appears to be. Qin he. A trace of doubt appeared on Li Yi's face. His lips moved slightly before he looked at Tsing Shichen and asked, how is the victim's sister now? Tsing Shichen said, in order to prevent the Cui family from silencing her, I have kept her in prison. But this time, if she is released, she can no longer sound the grievance drum of the capital yamen. Young Master, Liu Yizhong from the Ministry of Justice is here. Fong came in from outside, feeling puzzled. What was going on today? It wasn't a holiday, but everyone was running home. Tsing Shichen looked back and said, I'll go back first. If anything happens, I'll get someone to contact you. Li nodded and waved at Fong. He said, send Lord Tsing out through the back door. Lord Li, after Liu Yizhong entered, he first bowed to Li Yi. Just as he was about to speak, a voice rang in his ear. Do you only have eyes for Lord Li? Liu Yizhong was startled. When he saw the two people behind Li Yi, he immediately bowed and said, Greetings, Your Highness, Crown Prince. When he looked up again, his mouth opened, but he didn't know if he should speak. Li Yi waved his hand and said, It's fine. The princess and crown prince are on the same side. Tell me, how's the investigation of the case? Lu Yizhong nodded and said, the 2 missing women have been confirmed to have nothing to do with the Ping family. In the process of investigating the case, I unexpectedly found that the number of missing women in the capital region in the past 2 years has far exceeded the previous years. But the places where they went missing before were relatively scattered, involving more than a dozen counties. The number of missing people in each county is not large, but if you add them up, it is an extremely terrifying number. Li Yi frowned slightly. There are so many people, but there's no clue at all. Lu Yizhong shook his head and said, all the clues were inexplicably cut off after extending to the capital. Until now, there has been no useful discovery, and there is no direct evidence that these are related to the Cui family. Li Xian looked at him in surprise and asked, you suspect that the Cui family is also involved in the business of abducting women and selling women? I don't know. Li Yi shook his head and said, whether or not it has anything to do with the Cui family, we should always try our best to find the 2 missing women. Otherwise, this case will not be over. He turned his head to look at Lu Yizhong and said, you continue to follow up on this case. Then this subordinate will go back first. Lu Yizhong nodded. After a few steps, a trace of hesitation appeared on his face. He then turned his head and said, my lord, you can deal with those rotten scholars with all your strength. There is no need to pay attention to the Cui family. Li Xian looked at Lu Yizhong's back as he left, then turned his head and said, why do I feel that there is a hidden meaning in his words? Li Yi looked at him in surprise. You can hear the hidden meaning in his words. Without waiting for Li Xian to reply, Fang walked in with a surprised expression. He looked at Li Yi and said, young master, someone has come again. It is the old man called Prime Minister Qin who came last time. Li Xian and Mingzhu looked at each other. The regent eldest princess was together with the country's trader, which was rumored to be the talk of the outside world. It was not good for the prime minister to see it. Mingzhu looked at him and walked behind a screen with Li Xian. The white-haired old man stepped into the hall and said, young people are indeed fearless. The outside world is like a tide of rumors, yet you are still able to sit still. Li Yi stood up and cupped his hands. Prime Minister Qin, please sit. All right, I won't be sitting. I've only come here today to bring a message to you. Prime Minister Qin stood at the door and looked at him calmly. He said, stick to what you think is right. There are still many discerning people in the court. They will not watch everything you and Her Highness have done for these countries be destroyed in the hands of those with ulterior motives. Although I am old, with my old bones, I can still block them for you young people. He said one sentence, and only one sentence. After that, he turned around and left. It had to be said that Li Yi used to have some misunderstandings about the old man in front of him. However, some things that happened later changed his impression of Prime Minister Qin. Regardless of the Qin family, Prime Minister Qin was an old man who lived a pure life. He was an old man worthy of admiration. He watched Prime Minister Qin's figure disappear and Fang's big face appeared in front of him again. Fang's face showed an extremely puzzled expression. Young master, what festival is it today? Li Yi looked at him and asked, who is here? Old Lu of the county government. Chapter 893. County Magistrate Lu must have had a hard time these days. He must have been under a lot of pressure from all sides. Have a seat, Lord Lu. After he walked into the hall, Li Yi stretched out his hand and turned to Fang, go make a cup of tea for Lord Lu. County Magistrate Lu sat down uneasily. Seeing the tea cups on the table, he was slightly stunned. There were some guests just now. Mingzhu and Li Xian didn't come out from behind the screen, and Li Yi didn't explain too much. He looked at County Magistrate Lu and said, Lord Lu, I've troubled you these days. Lord Li, please don't say that. County Magistrate Lu hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands, saying, without Lord Li, there would be no me, Lu Dio, today. I can still distinguish some things. Li Yi smiled and asked, Lord Lu, did you encounter some difficulties today? Could it be that someone from above is pressuring you? County Magistrate Lu smiled carelessly and said, I'm the magistrate of the capital city, the magistrate of His Majesty and the common people. Other people and other things have nothing to do with me. He looked at Li Yi and asked, I wonder if Lord Li still remembers this lowly official's friend. Li Yi was stunned. He thought for a moment and asked, Lord Lu, are you talking about the friend of the single-eyelid parents? Lu Dao nodded and said, yes. Obviously, old Lu hadn't completely let go of this matter. Li Yi picked up the teacup and took a sip, indicating him to continue. He looked solemn and asked, Lord Li, I'll ask you again, is it really impossible for parents with single eyelid to give birth to children with double eyelid? Li Yi shook his head and said, I know it may be hard for Lord Lu to accept this matter, but this is indeed the law of nature, which has almost never changed since ancient times. County Magistrate Lu looked at Li Yi with hesitation on his face again. Finally, he made up his mind and said, to be honest, the person I'm talking about is not my friend. He had used this trick countless times, but he never thought that the person was a friend of County Magistrate Lu. Li Yi put down the teacup, sighed and said, in fact, I have known it for a long time. This time, it was County Magistrate Lu's turn to be shocked. He looked at Li Yi and asked in disbelief, Lord Li, you also know that the King of Shu is not His Majesty's biological son. He finally breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. If Lord Li had failed in the confrontation with the Chui family, his fate would not have been any better. Losing his official hat would have been a light punishment, and he might even have been killed. However, this matter was too important, and his life could be in danger at every turn. If it wasn't for his trust in Lord Li, unless it was a matter of life and death, he would definitely bury this secret in his heart forever. Unexpectedly, Lord Li had already known about this matter. What did you say? Li Yi looked at him in a daze and asked, Isn't your friend with single eyelids you? County Magistrate Lu was surprised and said, How could my friend be me? You mean, His Majesty. Li Yi reached out a hand and motioned him to stop talking. He rubbed the area between his eyebrows and tried to recall something in his mind. The old emperor had single eyelids, which was right. The king of Shu had double eyelids, which he also remembered very clearly. Imperial concubine Chui, Imperial concubine Chui. The key was Imperial concubine Chui. He had only met Imperial concubine Chui a few times, and most of the time was at night, so he really couldn't remember clearly. Clang. The screen on one side of the lobby fell to the ground, making a heavy sound. Seeing the two people coming out from behind the screen, County Magistrate Lu trembled and his legs suddenly became a little weak. Your Highness. Li Yi stood up and looked at Mingzhu, who was walking over, and asked, Do you remember whether Imperial concubine Chui has double eyelids or single eyelids? Mingzhu's expression was a little absent-minded. After a moment, her eyes focused again. She looked at him and said slowly, In the Jing Kingdom, double eyelids are considered beautiful. Imperial concubines are also required to have double eyelids. At that time, the Chui family was powerful in the imperial court. Only they could make an exception to send a woman with single eyelids into the palace and promote her to the position of imperial concubine. Li Yi didn't quite understand those people who would cut their bodies for double eyelids. Single eyelids and double eyelids had their own beauty. He didn't expect that the imperial concubines with single eyelids would be discriminated against in the selection of imperial concubines. It really shouldn't be, however, the key point of the problem now was not the problem of discrimination at all. It was a big problem. How could it be? How could it be? Li Xian shook his head repeatedly. The imperial palace was so strict and the imperial concubine was so noble. How could she do such a thing? Moreover, neither the Chui family nor imperial concubine Chui had any reason to do so. A hint of anger appeared on Li Xian's face as he said, The Chui family has committed a heinous crime. They have committed such a heinous crime, yet they are still stirring up trouble in the imperial court. I must report this matter to Uncle Huang. No. No. Li Yi and Emingzu spoke almost at the same time. You. Li Xian stared at them with his eyes wide open. Why? This matter was related to the reputation of the imperial family. It was a crime punishable by extermination. Once it was investigated, not only the Cui family, but anyone who had anything to do with the Cui family would not be able to escape. Those people had forced the emperor to summon the king of Shu back to the capital. They had become traitors who wanted to steal the country. It was good enough that they could protect themselves. How could they still be in the mood to clean up the side of the emperor? Emingzu didn't bother to pay attention to him. Li Yi glanced at him and asked, "What do you think His Majesty will do if he hears such news in his current condition?" Li Xian heard this and immediately fell silent. There was no doubt that if Uncle Emperor knew about this, the Cui family would definitely be destroyed. A large number of people in the capital would also die. But what about Uncle Emperor himself? The imperial physician had repeatedly warned that Uncle Emperor's body could no longer be stimulated. If he knew that the Cui family and imperial concubine Cui had done such a thing, the consequences would be unimaginable. We can't let Uncle Emperor know about this. Li Xian nodded and said, "What about you? If you let the Cui family go, how will you deal with those people?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "You don't have to worry about this matter. I have my own way." Li Xian looked at County Magistrate Liu and suddenly said, "This matter is related to the reputation of the imperial family. Even if we have to investigate it, we can't make it public. The fewer people who know about it, the better." Li Yi sighed and also looked at County Magistrate Liu. He murmured, "Only dead people can keep secrets." County Magistrate Liu's face was pale. He wanted to stand up, but he directly collapsed on the chair. When he walked out of the gate of the Li family, he still felt a little weak in his legs. He looked at the man beside him and said, "Brother Fang, help me a little." Fang held his arm and looked him up and down. He said with some disdain, "Old Liu, you should exercise more, don't keep me guessing. What's your way?" In the hall, Emingzu frowned and looked at him. She said, "Chu Ping is Chu Ping, and the Chu family is the Chu family. Even if we expose these two cases, we may not be able to shake the Chu family. Don't underestimate the Chu family's position in the hearts of the officials and people. Whether we can shake them or not depends on our skills." Li Yi walked out of the door and said, "But before that, I want to see Wen Gu of the Jing Kingdom." That's utter nonsense. His Majesty and Imperial Consort Cui both have single eyelids. I've seen the King of Shu with my own eyes. He clearly has double eyelids. His tone was resentful. "When I'm done with this part, I'll definitely submit a memorial to the Women's College. Let's focus on the matter at hand first." However, the elder did not pay much attention to what he said. After placing down another black chess piece, he smiled and said, "Brother Zhao, you've lost. Although the Xing family's mansion is big, it's not a good idea for you to live here all the time." Li Yi looked at drunken Mo and asked, "Why don't you just move over? Whenever you miss this place, you can come back and stay for a few days." She shook her head and said, "I won't leave Sister Ruoqing behind." Li Yi comforted her, who said you two should separate. When the time comes, Ruoqing will move over together, and you two can still live together. That's nothing. Even if you agree, Sister Ruoqing won't. She tilted her head and looked at Ruoqing. "Don't you think so, Sister Ruoqing?" Wan Ruoqing just smiled and did not answer. Li Yi looked at her and said, "All right, but the old madam has been talking about you for a long time. Let's pick a time, and I'll take you to see her." "Ah, the old madam of the Li family." Her expression immediately became a little flustered. Li Yi nodded and said, "If you don't go, I'll have to bring the old madam to see you." "This matter." She stood up, and the panic and nervousness on her face were even more obvious. She stammered, I haven't brushed my teeth today. Seeing her run into the room in a panic, Li Yi could only shake his head. He understood her concerns, and it was not good to force her on such a matter. After she left, the smile on Ruoqing's face gradually faded. She looked at him with some worry and said, I've heard the rumors outside. Mrs. Chen also asked me to bring you a message. Don't have a direct conflict with those people. Has the matter really reached such a serious point? Don't worry, it's just a small trouble. It will be solved soon. Li Yi stood up and looked at the closed door. He estimated that it would take a long time for drunken Mo to brush her teeth this time. After saying goodbye to Xiaozue, he looked at Wan Ruoqing and said, Let's go out for a walk. It was early May, and the weather was not very hot. Out of the Xing mansion, Wan Ruoqing comforted him. Drunken Mo should still be a little worried. I've been persuading her these days. I think after a few days, she will agree to move over. Li Yi tilted his head, looked at her, and asked, What about you? Me? Wan Ruoqing was stunned and said, After all, I've lived here for a long time. I'm still used to Willow Lane. I'll probably move back there. The house is too big, and it's always a little lonely with only a few people living there. It won't be lonely if there are more people. When walking to the door of the brothel, Li Yi smiled and said, You go in first. I have something to do. In a moment, forget it, let's talk about it later. Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked, Will you come back in a moment? Depends. Li Yi wanted to say that he would see how it went. Seeing her look at him, he swallowed the words that were in his throat and nodded. Come here. On the street, the sloppy old man limped behind him, but his speed was not slow. He shook his head and said, When you're young, you do what you think in your heart. It's better to regret now than to lament when you're old. Li looked at his legs and said, You go to second uncle every day, but you can't beat him. Why bother? What do young people know? The sloppy old man curled his lips disdainfully and said, If I meet Taoist nun again now, I can let her use one hand. Li Yi stopped before the guru finished bragging, because they had arrived at the Chu family. The gatekeeper of the Chu family was very polite. When he saw the young man and the old man, he asked them very politely if they had an invitation. When he learned that they did not, he also politely told them that the grand tutor was meeting some old friends today and would not see any guests. If they did not have an invitation, they should come back another day. Li Yi smiled and said, Please inform them that I'm here to visit the grand tutor. If the grand tutor really doesn't want to see us, we can leave. The gatekeeper saw that the young man in front of him was extraordinary. Although the old man behind him was not very agile, his eyes were very scary. He could not figure out their identity and said, Wait a minute, I'll go inform them. However, it's not certain whether the grand tutor will see you or not. Ning Qin. He murmured the name and quickly ran in. Somewhere in the capital, two figures walked out of a brothel. Hearing the gossip of the people around them, the middle-aged man turned his head and asked the man beside him, Some people in the capital say that Sir Li is a pillar of the court, and some say that he is a traitor. Wu Er, what do you think? I don't know. I'm not very familiar with Sir Li. The man beside him shook his head, thought for a moment, and said, However, I still think that Sir Li has been wronged. The middle-aged man looked at the crowd and murmured, Since he has been wronged, why doesn't he respond to the rumors in the capital and the fights in the court? Wu Er sighed and said, Who knows, don't worry. The middle-aged man patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, Sir Li is a hero of his generation. These clowns won't last long in front of him. We have to believe in him. Chapter 895. The Chu family. In the main hall, other than Grand Tutor Chu, there were several elders of similar ages. They all wore loose Confucian robes and had righteous expressions. Their bearing was extraordinary, and they seemed to have a noble character. A thin elder shook his head and said, "It's a pity. Although Grand Tutor Wang resigned long ago and the Wang family has always kept a low profile, if he was willing to stand out, the matter would not have been dragged out to this day." Another elder with a serious expression sighed and said, "Grand Tutor Wang, I once personally went to invite him, but he tactfully refused. He said that he was old and did not care about the affairs of the court." His words revealed his admiration for that sycophant. Back then, when the envoy of the Qi kingdom caused havoc in the capital, no one in the vast capital dared to fight. Grand Tutor Wang dragged his sick body to court and was persuaded by everyone. You all know what happened next. It's no wonder he was so impressed. It's fine if Grand Tutor Wang doesn't help either side, but isn't this Qin when Brother Chu's disciple? This time, he actually joined forces with many important officials in the court to speak up for that sycophant. If not for that, why didn't the officials respond as soon as Brother Chu spoke? The matter has been dragged on for so long. It's not just the officials. I'm afraid that even the common people will have to put in more effort. As they drank tea and discussed, a servant of the Chu family walked in from outside. He walked to Grand Tutor Chu's side and whispered a few words. "Ning Qin." Grand Tutor Chu frowned slightly. He had no impression of this person at all. When the gatekeeper saw this, he felt a wave of regret. He hurriedly said, "I'll send them away immediately." "Wait." He quickly walked out of the door, and a voice came from behind him. Grand Tutor Chu looked at him and asked, "You said that he is a young man about the same age as Ping Er, and that he is handsome and has an extraordinary bearing?" The gatekeeper immediately nodded. "He is handsome and much more handsome than young master." "Ning Qin, sycophant." Grand Tutor Chu murmured. A hint of doubt appeared on his face as he said in a low voice, "Let him in." At the entrance of the Chu family, the gatekeeper ran over and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He respectfully said to Li Yi, "Young master, please come in." Compared to the other rich and powerful families that Li Yi had seen, the Chu residence wasn't very big. In fact, it could even be said to be on the small side. Perhaps it was also because the Chu clan didn't have many descendants, and the 2 generations of the clan only had one son. Too large of a residence couldn't be used, and it would seem deserted. Led by the servant, they did not pass through the main residence, but took a small path to the left. Not long after, they arrived at a small garden. A figure dressed in a gray Confucian robe stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Li Yi wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but he felt that the body of this royal tutor was much hunchier than the last 2 times he saw him. The old man turned his head and asked calmly, "This old man has always been curious. When you saw me on the street that day, why did you hide?" At this moment, Li Yi realized that not only was his back hunched, but his complexion was also much older than before. It was as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. "I was afraid that you would blackmail me," Li Yi said honestly. "Unfortunately, I couldn't escape in the end." The 2 of them had been at loggerheads in the court that day, but when they met again, there was not the slightest atmosphere. The old man looked at him with a sharp gaze and asked, "You repeatedly prevented the eldest imperial son from entering the capital. Do you think that this old man has wronged you?" Li Yi smiled and said, "As for the reason, the royal tutor naturally understands." "Actually, I can understand the royal tutor." Li Yi gazed at the neatly trimmed flower garden to the side and slowly said, "The Chu clan has been a clean stream among the scholars of the Jing kingdom for many generations. They represent righteousness and righteousness. A mere sycophant naturally cannot compare to the Chu clan's century-old reputation." Royal Tutor Chu's expression was calm, but his fists, which were hidden in his sleeves, were tightly clenched. His veins were bulging. "I know that Cui Qingming used some shameful methods to get hold of the Chu clan's weakness." Li Yi shook his head and continued, "Your grandson deserves it, but the Chu clan should not be implicated. Even if the Chui clan expose those scandals, it will not shake the Chu clan's foundation. Although it will inevitably damage the Chu clan's reputation, it will not be difficult to make up for it in the future. He gazed at royal tutor Chu again. What is difficult is the royal tutor's choice. Royal tutor Chu stared at him. A moment later, he unclenched his fists and said, "All of this is just your one-sided statement. There is no stain on the Chu clan, and there is no need to make up for it." Li Yi met his gaze for a long time before sighing. He cupped his fists and said, "Since that's the case, royal tutor, this sycophant bids farewell." Just as he was about to walk out of the garden, he stopped and turned back to ask, was it worth it? This time, he did not receive any response from the old man. When he walked out of the Chu household, the unkempt old man saw that his expression was relaxed. There was no hesitation or apprehension from before. He asked in surprise, "What, did you succeed?" Li Yi nodded, "It's done." The unkempt old man was somewhat disappointed along the way. He thought he could watch a great show, but from the looks of it, there wasn't much hope. When he arrived at the entrance of the brothel, he asked again, "How long will I be staying inside today?" "I'll go out for a walk." "I'm not going back today." Li Yi waved his hand. "You can walk as long as you want. Just let me know at home before nightfall." "You're not going back?" The unkempt old man looked at him in surprise and asked, "Are you sure?" Li Yi nodded and stepped into the brothel. Recently, there hadn't been many exciting shows at the brothel. The customers were already beginning to complain. It was time to add something new. He habitually glanced at the small building in front of him and happened to meet a gaze from the window of the loft. Li Yi was startled for a moment, then he smiled and waved his hand towards that direction, then walked over quickly. "He's not coming back tonight." "The Li family." Mississippi Lu frowned. "Where is he?" The unkempt old man shrugged. "A place to watch a show." Mississippi Lu waved her sleeves. "Take me there." Rui grabbed her arm and shook her head. "My husband said before he went out this morning that he had something important to do today. He might not come back tonight." "What are you going to do?" "I'm not going to look for him." Mississippi Lu shook her head and said, I'm going to watch a show." In the room above the loft of the brothel. When Li Yi saw Ru watching writing, she frowned slightly and seemed to be in pain. He asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" She put down the pen and looked at her fingers. She shook her head and said, "Maybe I've held the pen for too long these 2 days. There are blisters." Li Yi saw that there was a blister on her fingers. He frowned and said, "Forget it. Don't write anymore. When I finish writing this chapter, you can tell me how to arrange it and I'll write it down." Li Yi put down the pen and said, "I'll help you pop the blister first. You can rest for a while." He took out a sterilized needle. These things were always available here. He held her hand and poked a hole in the blister. He squeezed out the liquid inside but didn't completely pop it. He looked up and asked, "Does it hurt?" "No." Ruoqing smiled and shook her head. Li Yi nodded and said, "The wound needs to be disinfected. I'll apply some alcohol on it now. It might hurt a little. Just bear with it." Even though she was mentally prepared, when he applied the alcohol, she couldn't help but let out a suppressed cry of pain when she suddenly felt the stinging pain. "It hurts. Just bear with it." Mississippi Lu stood outside the door with a livid face. When she heard the woman's suppressed voice, she finally couldn't help but push the door open and enter. "Don't touch water these days, and don't write." Li Yi put down the things in his hands and looked at her to remind her. Then he turned to look at Mississippi Lu and asked in surprise, "Rui, why are you here?" Mississippi Lu glanced around the room and then looked at Li Yi. She said lightly, "I'm here to ask you to go home for dinner." Chapter 896. Women were really strange. She said that she wanted to invite him back for a meal, but she left by herself. It was likely that the sloppy elder's girlish heart had run wild and he had forgotten to bring a message back. Time was tight to begin with, so there was no need to waste any more time. Li Yi held a cold steamed bun in his mouth and wrote as he ate. He turned to Wan Ruoqing and said, "If you haven't eaten, go out and eat something first. I still need a while to finish." Wan Ruoqing nodded and went out. When she came back again, she was holding a food box in her hand. She looked at Li Yi and shook her head. "You can't just eat steamed buns. I bought some porridge. Have some." Li Yi nodded and said, "Leave it there first. I'll eat it later." He wasn't too hungry. Of course, the most important thing was to hurry up. After leaving the Chu family today, there was no turning back. There was no need to hold back against an enemy. After writing a few words, a gentle voice sounded in his ear. "Open your mouth." Li Yi paused and looked back at her. This scene was so familiar. He subconsciously opened his mouth, and she gently placed the spoon in. An interesting play not only needed a brilliant script, but the stage layout, the actors' acting skills, as well as their expressions and lines were all very important. All he could do was the first step. The rest of the more detailed and tedious matters had to be left to professionals like her. After he wrote the first chapter, he discussed these matters with her for more than 2 hours. They discussed from day to night. Li Yi saw the fatigue between her brows and said, "I'll write the next chapter. Rest for a while." Wan Ruoqing nodded and didn't refuse. She had been busy until late last night, so she was actually a little sleepy. She still had to discuss the second chapter later, so it was beneficial to take a short rest now. She leaned over the small table by the bed and looked at the flickering candlelight before slowly closing her eyes. Paw! The oil lamp gave off a spark and let out a soft sound. When she slowly opened her eyes, she found that she was lying on the bed, covered with a thin layer of quilt. She got up from the bed and looked in a certain direction subconsciously. There was no one at the table. Has he gone back? The paper spread out on the table should be the finished script. She picked it up and looked at it. It was indeed finished. It was dark outside the window. It was already very late. After tomorrow, she would be busy again, and even busier than before. In order to ensure enough energy, she had to rest early even though she wasn't sleepy. She took off her coat and only wore a dudu. She put it on the cabinet and sat on the bed. Just as she was about to take off her shoes and socks, the door was pushed open from the outside. Usually, only she and Yuzhu lived in this small building, so the door didn't need to be locked from the inside. She subconsciously thought that it was Xiao Zhu who came in, but when she looked up, her expression froze. "You're awake. I was afraid that you would be hungry at night, so I cooked a bowl of noodles for you." Li Yi walked in with a tray and closed the door with his foot. When he heard her explanation, he was also stunned. After a long time, he asked tentatively, "Why don't you put on your clothes first?" I thought you had left." Wan Ruoqing put on her clothes, her cheeks still red. "Well, it ended a little earlier than expected. I'll leave right away." Li Yi put down the tray and couldn't help but turn his head to look at her. It was really strange. The new style of underwear had become completely popular in the capital, but whether it was Mississippi Liu, Zuamo, or Ruoqing, they all had a special fondness for dudu. It really didn't make sense, this. "Did you cook it?" Wan Ruoqing looked at the fragrant noodles on the table. In addition to a few green decorations on top of the noodles, there was also a poached egg. She turned to look at him and asked, "There is no kitchen here." "I went outside deliberately." Li Yi looked at her, shook his head, and said, "Although it's not good to eat so late, it's my birthday after all. I still have to eat longevity noodles. Wan Ruoqing looked at him and said in a daze, birthday? Li Yi asked helplessly, your birthday is only half a month later than Zui Mo's. Don't tell me you've forgotten it yourself. Her face was a little red. She sat at the table and ate the noodles. Li Yi walked over and opened the window. In the distant night sky, the first light bloomed. Then there were 2, 10, 100, and countless. Wan Ruoqing held her chopsticks and looked out of the window absent-mindedly. The fireworks illuminated half of the sky. On the street not far from the window, there were countless exclamations. From her direction, he stood at the place where the fireworks were the most brilliant, smiling and waving at her. Li Yi didn't stay out all night. If he really had a long talk with Ruoqing all night, it was very likely that Mississippi Lu would come over in the middle of the night to ask him to go back for dinner. What's more, in the next few days, Ruoqing would be very busy and needed enough time to rest. At the very least, it was not good for a man and a woman to be alone in a room. If it was spread out, it would ruin the girl's reputation. If she couldn't get married in the future, it would be great. Even so, when he returned home, it was after midnight. There was no light in the whole house. Rui and the child should have fallen asleep long ago. He groped his way to the study, but he didn't turn on the light. He walked to the bed, lay down, and slept in his clothes. When he stretched out his hand to pull the quilt, his palm touched a very soft place. He subconsciously squeezed it, and a cold voice seemed to ring in his ear. Take your hand away. It didn't seem like it, but it was. Li Yi turned over and got out of bed. Looking at Mississippi Lu who sat up on the bed, he said in surprise, why are you sleeping here? When he asked this question, he realized that he had asked a nonsense question. Recently, Mississippi Lu had abandoned martial arts for literature. She studied hard every day and even occupied his study. Most of the time, she read until late at night. It was not a difficult thing to understand that she slept here at night. A tiger's butt should not be touched, let alone a tigress' butt. Li Yi hid the hand behind his back and took a few steps back, always alert for sword light beside the bed. When he retreated to the door, he saw that there was no movement beside the bed. He thought for a while and asked again, if I go to sleep now, I will definitely disturb the child. The guest room is not cleaned. If you sleep here, where should I sleep? Your room. Finally, there was some movement beside the bed. Mississippi Lu got out of bed. Although Li Yi could feel 2 eyes in the dark, which made him feel guilty, Mississippi Lu didn't mention what had happened just now. She walked straight past him and left the study. He closed the door and went back to the bed to lie down. A familiar light fragrance lingered in his nose. After being stunned for a while, he murmured, is there a difference? Since the capital entered summer, the weather became hot and dry, and the situation was also restless. In the court, the 2 forces led by Grand Tutor Chu and Prime Minister Qin had new changes every day. The common people were also affected a lot. Rumors were everywhere. However, County Marquis Li, who was at the heart of the struggle, was as still as a mountain from beginning to end. He didn't make any response or reaction to it, which made everyone puzzled. Of course, although this matter affected the hearts of the common people, the affairs of the court and the debate between loyalty and treachery were too far away from them. It was not an easy choice to believe in the famous Grand Tutor Chu or Lord Li, who had done a lot of good things for the common people. Compared with this matter, the new play that had been promoted in the brothel since a few days ago was obviously much closer to them. That new play had a trial screening in only one brothel in the capital today. Even if the brothel was already full of people, the guests who didn't buy tickets in advance could only stand outside the door and sigh. The spectators who were lucky enough to buy tickets were naturally complacent. In the dark theater, only the lights around the stage were on. They didn't wait long. The stage curtain was opened, and a faintly discernible voice floated into their ears. Flowers will bloom again, but people will never be young again. There is no need to be rich and powerful. Peace and happiness are immortals. The curtain was completely opened, and an old woman in cotton clothes with a bent body appeared on the stage. The old woman took a few steps forward and introduced, "I'm Granny Kai, from Chuzhou City. We are the family of 3. Unfortunately, my husband has passed away, and he only has one child, who is 8 years older than me. I have 2 children and my family is quite rich. Here is Scholar Do." The ordinary opening was the original routine of a common play, but because of the overwhelming promotion in the brothel, at this moment, people were still looking forward to the play. Chapter 897. At the beginning of the play, there was a cliffhanger. Do Tianzhang, a shiotsai in Chuzhou City, owed Granny Kai 40 taels of silver, so he had to sell his 7-year-old daughter, Do Yi, to Granny Kai as a child bride. Do Tianzhang received 10 taels of silver from Granny Kai for traveling expenses, and then went to the capital city to take the exam. There were not many highlights in this cliffhanger, but the actors on the stage were excellent, and the plot was smooth. It was quite enjoyable to watch, so the audience was not disappointed. That little Duanyun is quite good at acting at such a young age. You don't know. They have been trained in this field since they were young. Since they can go on the stage, you can't find any fault with them. That's true. But since this play is called Do Yi's Injustice, I don't know what the injustice is. What's the hurry? It's just the beginning. Let's keep watching. Because of the popularity of the Justice Bao series, people were very fond of this kind of drama. Who wouldn't like to redress the grievances of the people? Soon, they found out why Do Yi had been wronged. The Kai family moved, Do Yi's husband died early, and she and her mother-in-law depended on each other. Then, they were framed by evil people and happened to meet a corrupt official. Do Yi had no choice but to confess and admit the crime in order to save her mother-in-law from being tortured. She was sentenced to death and sent to the execution ground. According to the usual practice of the play, this was the most exciting part of the play. This corrupt official deserves to die. This daughter-in-law is so filial. She is willing to bear the injustice in order to save her mother-in-law. Where is Lord Bao? Why isn't he here? Quickly reverse the verdict for Do Yi. Have you ever seen a play before? How could Lord Bao show up at this time? It was Guard Zhan who descended from the sky and shouted, "Spare her life." Finally, someone couldn't help but remind them. "Brothers, are you two acting? Really? Isn't that Justice Bao?" Back to the stage. Do Yi had been sent to the execution ground. 2 voices rang in the audience's ears, like a huge bell. Breaking the law for no reason, not being on guard against being punished by the Constitution, the cry was earth-shattering. In an instant, wandering souls went to the Senluo temple. How could they not blame the heaven and earth? Good people suffer poverty and have a shorter life, while evil people enjoy wealth and have a longer life. Heaven and earth. He acted as if he was afraid of the strong and bullied the weak, but it turned out that this was also how he pushed the boat with the current. You're the earth, yet you can't tell good from bad. Heaven, you are wrong to judge the virtuous and foolish to be heaven. As soon as these 2 sentences were spoken, everyone's hearts immediately sank. They seemed to feel that the injustice Do Yi had suffered had reached the point where even heaven and earth resented her. At this time, the executioner said, "Death is at hand, what else do you have to say?" Do Yi said, "I want a clean banquet. When I, Do Yi, stand up, I want Zhang, 2 white ropes to hang on the spear. If I, Do Yi, am really wronged, my head will fall wherever the knife passes. My hot blood will not stain the ground, it will all fly to the white silk. Now is the hottest time of the year. If Do-e is really wronged, after she dies, 3 feet of auspicious snow will fall from the sky and cover her corpse. Do-e died a wrong death. From now on, Chuzhou City will suffer from drought for 3 years. Do-e's voice was sorrowful as she made 3 wishes in a row. Blood stains the white silk, blood splatters in June, 3 years of drought. The crowd was silent, and no one was talking anymore. The executioner shouted angrily, "The time has come, execute her." In the middle of the stage, the executioner swung the knife down, and Do-e fell to the ground. Her blood sprayed into the air and splashed on the white silk. At this moment, more than half of the people in the audience couldn't help but stand up. Blood stains on the white silk, it was indeed blood stains on the white silk. Do-e's first wish had come true. On the stage, the executioner quietly made a hand gesture, and a board rose up from where a piece of the stage was missing, and the stage became seamless again. Right at this moment, someone below suddenly shivered and murmured, "Why do I feel that the surroundings are chilly?" Someone couldn't help but wrap his arms around himself. Although the weather was hot, there were ice mirrors everywhere. Even if it wasn't hot, it wouldn't be cold. Someone suddenly felt a chill in his nose, and he couldn't help but touch his nose, only to find that it was wet. When he raised his head, he discovered that there were actually white snowflakes falling from the sky. Is it snowing? How is that possible? It's summer now, and we are in a brothel. Above everyone's heads, on the thick beam, someone was standing there, gently shaking the bamboo basket in his hand, and extremely fine ice shards were scattered down from above. When everyone looked back to the stage, Do-e's body had already been buried under the snow. As the tragic music became clearer, the lines of the opera surfaced in everyone's mind. "I don't want half a star of blood spilled in the mortal world, it's all in the air. If I have a heart full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers roll like a brocade, so that my body won't be revealed." Do-e died an unjust death. From now on, Chuzhou City will suffer a drought for 3 years. This time, there was no bodyguard John, no justice Bao, and Do-e was executed. The vows she made before her death were fulfilled one by one. Blood splashed on the white silk, and snow fell in June. According to common sense, this was impossible. Even heaven and earth were touched by her grievances, and her wish was fulfilled. 3 years later, Do-e's father, Do Tianzhong, would reverse the verdict for her and clear her name. However, at this moment, the atmosphere in the brothel was getting out of control. On the stage, the performers who were about to start their performance had no choice but to stop. Below the stage, many people stared at the stage in a daze, and many had tears streaming down their cheeks. Do-e was unfortunate, and she was miserable. However, only a few of those who could sit and watch the show were from rich families. Their status was not much higher than Do-e's, and they were also bullied by all kinds of evil forces. This was Do-e's injustice, and it was also their injustice. The show could no longer go on, so the manager of the brothel announced that the last twist of Do-e's injustice would be postponed. When the audience walked out of the brothel, they felt that the scorching sun was not as hot as it used to be. Instead, they felt a chill down their spines. They were sweating, but it was cold sweat. "What's wrong with you guys? Is the show over? Was it good? What's going on? Say something." The audience couldn't get any useful information from the people who had already walked out of the brothel. By then, the second show was about to begin, so they didn't have time to ask the audience questions. After a long time, the second group of people walked out of the brothel. An unjust case shocked the world, and snow fell in June. In just a few days, the play known as "The Greatest Injustice of All Time" had spread across the capital. All the other shows in the dozens of brothels in the capital had temporarily stopped, and only ease and justice was being rehearsed in every brothel. In the county government of the capital, County Magistrate Liu looked at the thick stack of papers in front of him and suddenly felt dizzy. He slumped in his chair and murmured, "How can there be so many unjust cases in the capital, right under the feet of the emperor?" Below, Arrestor Zhao showed a wry smile and said, "Lord Liu, don't complain. These days, it's the same everywhere in the county government. Chuzhou is our neighbor. The governor of Chuzhou and the magistrate of Shanyang County have been scolded badly. The people of the capital are filled with righteous indignation. Some people are even kneeling at the gate of the palace, begging the princess to investigate the case thoroughly and prove Dou Yi's innocence. This is just a play." County Magistrate Liu slammed the table angrily and said loudly, "But there are so many unjust cases, how can I investigate?" "Sir, this is really nothing. Think about it this way. In the play, if it wasn't the magistrate of Shanyang County, but the magistrate of the capital, shut up." County Magistrate Liu's face turned pale, and his whole body quivered. He suddenly bounced up from the chair and shouted, "Beat the drum, raise the court, I'm going to break 10 today." On the street in the capital, a man looked at the woman next to him and said pitifully, "My wife, believe me, I really lost my purse. I didn't keep a vixen outside." The woman said angrily with a face full of disbelief, "How dare you deny it? You have the smell of her perfume on you, do you think I can't smell it?" The man helplessly took out a bottle of perfume from his pocket and said, "This is the birthday gift I bought for you with the money I saved for a year," he said with a sad face. "How dare you suspect me of keeping a vixen outside? I am more innocent than Dou Yi." "What? You have a secret stash of money?" At the corner of the street, a woman chased after an 8 or 9-year-old child and said angrily, "You didn't go to school today, did you go to the brothel?" The child stopped and shook his head, "I didn't." "You are wrongly accusing me." The woman grabbed his arm, "How dare you lie to me? The teacher in school told me everything. I really didn't." The child shook his head violently and said loudly, "Mother, you are wrongly accusing me. If I die of being wrongly accused, I will make my blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years in the capital. You are still denying it." The woman took off his pants on the street and slapped him a few times, saying as she slapped him, "I will make your blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years. Recently, there was a wind of crying injustice in the capital. Everyone, regardless of gender or age, called themselves Dou Yi. When the brothel performed for free, there were even no pedestrians on the usually crowded streets. In addition, the government offices in each county were blocked by the people who appealed every day. The situation did not improve until the government suppressed several groups of troublemakers with a tough attitude. At this time, in front of the government office of the Ministry of Justice, a weak woman walked out of the crowd. After beating the big drum at the entrance of the government office, she knelt in front of the door and cried out in a sad voice, "Sir, I am wrongly accused." Chapter 898. Sir, I've been wronged. The woman knelt in front of the Ministry of Justice. Her voice was extremely sorrowful, as if she had a great grievance in her heart that she had nowhere to cry about. It drew the sidelong glances of passers-by. Recently, the common people had been filing complaints. It wasn't just the yamen of the various counties, but also the yamen of the capital, the Imperial Censorate, the Ministry of Justice, and even the Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Rights, and Ministry of Works. As long as it was a yamen, it was unavoidable. After all, the number of yamens was limited, and there were many people. It was impossible for them all to gather together. Even if all the yamens in Jingdou were taken into account, there wouldn't be enough. This kind of situation had greatly hindered the normal operation of the yamen. Thus, the eldest princess quickly made an order based on the feelings of the people and the actual situation in Jingdou. Anyone who took the opportunity to purposely cause trouble and block the yamen would be severely punished as a warning to others. If there were truly any grievances, they should be filed in an orderly manner. The relevant yamen would deal with them one by one according to the urgency and severity of the case. Any grievances had to be tried, and any cases had to be reversed. The bottom line of the law was strictly observed, and the people were given a clear sky. With the eldest princess order, the vigorous anti-corruption cases among the people were temporarily eased. It didn't disappear. Instead, it went from disorder to order. Countless eyes were fixed on the various yamens in Jingdo. At this critical juncture, even the usually unbridled playboys in Jingdo were tightly restrained by their families. They were terrified that they would cause trouble and become targets in everyone's eyes. Even a small matter would be infinitely magnified to a point where their families couldn't bear it. The Ministry of Justice usually dealt with serious cases. Unless the emperor designated it, the main hall of the Ministry of Justice was usually closed, and complaints of grievances were not allowed in front of the Ministry of Justice. However, this time was different. Each county yamen was about to go crazy, and the Ministry of Justice couldn't be idle either. A bailiff had already come out from inside and kindly helped the woman up from the ground. He kindly asked her what grievances she had suffered and if she had a piece of paper. If she didn't, she could have a bailiff from the Ministry of Justice write one for free. From beginning to end, there wasn't much impatience on their faces. So many people were watching on the street. If one place wasn't handled well, the Ministry of Justice's reputation would be ruined. This was a special time. If something went wrong at this time, it would be strange if the minister didn't skin them alive. Soon, the woman was helped into the hall by a Ministry of Justice runner. Among the onlookers on the street, someone shook his head and said, "In terms of how they treat the common people, the officials of the Ministry of Justice are still the best. Unlike the governor's mansion. I heard that some time ago, someone went to the yamen to seek justice, but the people of the yamen didn't care. They even locked the person up for disturbing the yamen. Compared to the Ministry of Justice, the difference is obvious." "That's right." As soon as he finished speaking, someone else chimed in, "Unfortunately, I was also present at that time. It is said that the young lady's younger sister died. This is a murder case. The people at the capital's magistrate's office are really too careless. I heard that the young lady has been arrested several times." "What is the capital magistrate worried about?" Another person interrupted. "The one who went in just now seems to be the young lady. Why is she in the Ministry of Justice this time? There's such a thing." Someone's face was filled with anger as he quickly walked towards the entrance of the Ministry of Justice. "If that's the case, I might have to take a look at this case. I'm going too. Let's go together." At the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, the excited crowd was stopped by the yamen officials. However, they didn't stop them for long. After verifying their identities, someone specially led them in. Based on the principle of fairness and openness, when the Ministry of Justice was conducting a case, the common people were allowed to listen in. The Ministry of Justice claimed that there were laws to abide by, that the law was enforced strictly, and that those who violated the law would be punished. For some cases, the process of handling the case was completely transparent, which won many people's hearts. Of course, in order not to disturb the order of the case, the number of people listening in was still limited to 50. However, although most people couldn't see it with their own eyes, the various details of the case would be passed on through the mouths of these 50 people. In a short period of time, the news would spread throughout the entire capital. In the court, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Louis, patted the gavel and asked, "Who are you? Where do you live? What are your grievances? Tell me slowly." The woman stood in the court and said softly, "Your Excellency, my name is Lin Qin. I live near the city gate of the capital. My younger sister is 16 years old. Her maiden name is Lin Shuangshuang. She used to be a musician at the Miaoyin Pavilion. On the night of the 15th of the first month, today's court will be held by Lu Qingtian. This lady is really lucky this time. Every case handled by Lu Qingtian has been solved by him. Not necessarily. It's very likely that the capital governor's residence will be involved in this case. However, I still believe in Lu Qingtian. In the past few years, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, had handled countless cases. No matter how well hidden the criminal was, there was no place for him to hide. This was because he often helped the people and solved ordinary cases. He was deeply loved and respected by the people of the capital. People gave him the nickname of Lu Qingtian. Lu Qingtian had the meaning of the Great Lord of Justice. It also overlapped with the fictional image of Justice Bao in the opera. This was the highest praise the people of the capital had for him. Inside the court, when the woman was complaining about her grievances, people outside the court had already understood. So this woman is Miss Shuangshuang's sister. Miss Shuangshuang's zither skills were unparalleled. It's a pity that she died young. That 100 birds pay homage to the phoenix will never be heard again. What a pity, what a pity. Didn't the capital governor's office say that it was the work of a criminal from the imperial court? Bullshit capital governor's office. One of the people who had been paying attention to the situation inside the court was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He angrily said, "Listen, this lady only wanted to see Miss Shuangshuang's body, but the capital governor's office found a reason to arrest her. Later on, they used a few more reasons to lock her up in prison for almost half a year. If there's nothing fishy going on, I won't believe it even if I beat you to death." At this time, as the woman in the court explained, the case gradually became clear. According to the explanation given by the capital governor's office, on the night of the Upper Yuan dynasty, a criminal from the imperial court hid in the Fine Sound Pavilion. After using extremely cruel methods to kill Miss Shuangshuang, he tried to harm the young master of the Chu family but failed. Then, he jumped out of the window and escaped. Even now, although the wanted poster had been posted everywhere, the criminal had not been arrested. If it weren't for the lady standing in the court, perhaps the case would have passed with the passage of time and be forgotten by people. However, her experience and the actions of the capital governor's office added many points of doubt to the case. How did Miss Shuangshuang die? How did the criminal escape the heavy pursuit of the government without leaving a single trace? What role did the capital governor's office play in this case? The entire case suddenly became complicated and confusing. Everyone said that Dou Yi was wronged. This lady's younger sister had died a dubious death. She went to the government to seek redress and was imprisoned for half a year. She had no place to seek redress for her grievances, so how could she not be wronged? Once the case broke out, it quickly attracted the attention of the people of the capital. It also made the Ministry of Justice pay great attention to it. The relevant witnesses of the Fine Sound Pavilion had already been brought to the Ministry of Justice and were heavily protected. The Ministry of Justice had also sent in a request to pull out all the files related to the case from the capital governor's office and reinvestigate the case. They wanted to prove the innocence of the deceased and give the people who were paying attention to the case an explanation. Under these circumstances, Dou Yi's injustice continued to be performed in various brothels in the capital. Every day, countless benefit performances were held. In a certain brothel, Fang looked at Li Yi and said with some heartache, "Young master, this stage, this scene, this effect, so much ice, and only so little ticket money, and so many benefit performances. This time, we've suffered a great loss." Li Yi shook his head and looked at him. With sincere and heartfelt words, he said, "Don't always think about money. You also have to think about contributing to society." Chapter 899. People should look forward to the future, but they couldn't always focus on money. Fang had never been an educated man, so it was normal that he couldn't keep up with the times. Therefore, it was necessary to help him establish a correct outlook on life and values. For example, money could never be used up. When the time was right, he should give back to the society by helping the people perform for free, so that they could enjoy a 5D movie experience. Although he would lose money, he would be giving back to the society, which would help him realize his self-worth. Looking at his confused face, Chen Fan knew that he didn't understand. But this was not a big deal. The current Old Fong's state of mind was much higher than before. He did good deeds without leaving his name, risked his life, and used his private money to support a single girl for 3 years without asking for anything in return. Even in this era where people's hearts were not so fickle, it was still very rare. This world doesn't give the poor a chance to live. Earth, you don't know what's good for you. Heaven, you don't know what's good for you. I don't want to shed even half a star of blood in the mortal world. If I have a stomach full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers rolling like a brocade, so that my body won't be exposed. From now on, the Chuzhou city will suffer from 3 years of drought. Inside the brothel, someone would stand up and shout from time to time. This was a typical example of someone who was too engrossed in the scene and placed himself in it. There was no need for the staff of the brothel to remind them at all. Someone beside them would press them down so that they wouldn't spoil everyone's interest. In another brothel, in a remote corner, the man handed a handkerchief to the middle-aged man next to him and sighed. "Lord 5, wipe your tears." The middle-aged man wiped his tears and heaved a sigh. "Well done. It's a good performance." The burly man nodded. If he didn't know that this was a play, he would have rushed up and punched that dog official to death with 3 punches when blood was splashed on the white rope and snow was flying in the 6th month of June. The middle-aged man stared at the stage and murmured, "Do Yi's grievances could be redressed, but I wonder how many more people's grievances are still buried in the darkness." The burly man shook his head and said, "The imperial court is already vigorously investigating the unjust and false cases. Those filthy and ugly fellows hiding in the dark will one day be dragged out and exposed to the sun." The middle-aged man nodded. "Yes, the sun is about to rise. How could it be? How could she sue the Ministry of Justice?" Cui Qingming's face was filled with rage. The teacup in his hand fell to the ground and the tea splashed everywhere. He gasped for breath and loudly said, "Last time, we have already lost an assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Now, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Luigi, is only following that person's orders. That woman is still in prison. How could such a thing happen? She caused trouble twice a few days ago and has already attracted the attention of some people. Without a reason, we can't keep her in prison forever." Tsing Shichen shook his head and said, "I thought she would be more obedient after being locked up for so long. Who would have thought that as soon as she went out, the people following her were not paying attention and made her kneel in front of the Ministry of Justice?" Cui Qingming returned to his seat and calmed down for a while. Then, he said in a deep voice, "I will take care of this case. Otherwise, if it really gets investigated, not to mention Chu Ping, even you, the capital governor, will not be able to protect yourself." As soon as he finished speaking, a runner came in to report that the Ministry of Justice had arrived. Cui Qingming suddenly stood up from his seat, his face full of shock. How could it be so fast? The case of Miss Shuang of the wonderful Sound Pavilion quickly had new developments. The case file of the capital governor's office that had accepted the case was full of loopholes and could not withstand scrutiny. The coroner who had examined the corpse also revealed the truth under the interrogation of the Ministry of Justice. That night, Miss Shuang was not killed by the criminal. Instead, she was tortured and humiliated to death. As for why the murderer was said to be the criminal who might not have appeared, they would have to ask the young master of the Chu family who was in the same room as Miss Shuang. The Chui family. A middle-aged man slammed the table and said angrily, how could there be such a big oversight? Does Tsing Shichen not have a brain? Doesn't he know what time it is? Then, a suspicious expression appeared on his face and he muttered, could it be Tsing Shichen? What good does this do for him? Cui Qingming shook his head and said, this case has attracted the attention of the court and the people. If it is found out, not only will he lose his position as the capital governor, but he will also lose his official position. The middle-aged man revealed a defeated expression. That Lu Yi is a ruthless character. It is said that there is no case that he cannot solve. This time, I'm afraid that the Chu family. One Chu family, one capital governor, we. Cui Qingming clenched his fists and asked through gritted teeth, what's the situation with the Chu family? The middle-aged man shook his head and said, the Ministry of Justice has not summoned Chu Ping for the time being, but it should be soon. In that place, no matter how tight-lipped one is, it is inevitable. What about that matter? The people no longer trust the Chu family. Even those great scholars do not dare to risk universal condemnation and speak casually. After all, this case has too many implications, and the situation is not optimistic. Cui Qingming thought for a long time and loosened his fists. He slowly said, the Chu family can't be saved, but the capital governor may not. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, then asked, will we also be dragged into this matter? Cui Qingming shook his head and said, Tsing Shichen is a smart man. He knows what to do. The Ministry of Justice investigated cases very quickly, and this case was extremely fast. They had no choice but to act quickly. The entire capital was watching the progress of the case, so they did not dare to delay. And this case was actually not complicated. There was no need to summon the grandson of the Grand Tutor. The several bailiffs of the capital government who knew about the case confessed everything not long after they were brought to the Ministry of Justice. They had indeed been pursuing a criminal that day, but the criminal had not been in the fine sound pavilion. They had accidentally stumbled upon young Master Chu's deed, only to discover to their shock that young Master Chu, who liked to play tricks, had accidentally strangled the young lady to death. What happened next was logical. The Chu family was a famous noble family in the capital. How could they tolerate such a stain on a member of their family? Naturally, they used the power of the family to cover up this matter. Thus, the cause of Lady Shuang's death became a crime committed by a fugitive. The young master of the Chu family, who was originally the murderer, suddenly became the victim. In order to cover up the truth, they quickly disposed of Lady Shuang's body. When Lady Shuang's sister went to the Yamen to complain, they were afraid that the matter would be exposed, so they also arrested her and threw her into prison, adding insult to injury. This was simply insane. The injustice of Do Yi was just a play and could not be taken seriously, but Lady Shuang's grievance had really happened right beside them. They had heard it with their own ears, seen it with their own eyes, and had always been paying attention, and during the course of the trial, the bailiffs of the capital government revealed another secret that further solidified Chu Ping's crime. Not long ago, the disappearance of a girl that had caused an uproar actually also had the shadow of this young master of the Chu family. However, this matter was still concealed by the all-powerful Chu family. It was precisely because of this young master of the Chu family's perverted hobby that Lady Shuang had died a wrongful death. Lady Shuang must have been forced by that beast. No wonder it snowed on the night of the Lantern Festival. I originally thought that it was a strange phenomenon that happened once every few decades, but it turns out that the heavens were crying out for Lady Shuang's injustice. To think that I had always thought that the Chu family was the backbone of our Jing kingdom, that Grand Tutor Chu was a just and righteous person, but who would have thought, he still has the cheek to say that Lord Li is a sycophant. What has Lord Li done? He has made great contributions to the country and the people, but he is not the least bit proud of it. He has even repeatedly resigned from his position and refused to be rewarded. And what about him? He covered up for his descendant, causing such a huge injustice? How can he still be called a scholar? He even wants to frame Lord Li, the pillar of our Jing kingdom. If not for Prime Minister Qin and the other officials in the imperial court, I'm afraid, sycophant, this is a true sycophant. Old and undying, a great traitor to the country. In the court, Lu Qingtian slammed the gavel. Summon Chu Ping. A few bailiffs quickly walked out of the main gate and headed towards the Chu family. At first, there were only a few people following behind them. Soon, it became 10, then 100. After passing through an alley, the crowd behind them could no longer be seen. Chapter 900. The Chu family. Is this real or not, Grand Tutor? What should we do? The public's discontent is already boiling outside. They're coming here. Several elders paced back and forth in the hall with anxious expressions on their faces. Because of the Fine Sound Pavilion murder case, the Chu family had already been pushed to the heart of the struggle. As the case progressed, although most of the officials could still maintain their calm due to the prestige of the Grand Tutor, the common people of the capital had already lost trust in the Chu family and the elders. Yesterday, a rather famous scholar had been smashed in the head with a rock for merely saying, a sycophant harming the country, against County Marquis Li. His body was covered in rotten leaves and he was in an extremely sorry state. When he returned home, even the walls of the courtyard had been pushed down. The cause of all this was the Chu family. The Chu family had won the hearts of the people, but they had also lost the hearts of the people. The old man before them was just an ordinary old man. Grand Tutor Chu sat in a chair with a calm expression. It was impossible to tell what was on his face. He only stared blankly at the door as if in thought, but his eyes were empty. A servant of the Chu family ran in a panic and shouted, "The Ministry of Justice is here." Several constables walked in and slowly bowed to the old man in the chair. The one in the lead said, "Lord Grand Tutor, we suspect that your grandson is related to a serious case. Please come with us, young Master Chu." A middle-aged man rushed out from the side and shouted, "You think you can take Ping away just because you suspect him?" The constable took out an item from his sleeve and handed it over. He bowed and said, "Lord Chu, this is a warrant from the Ministry of Justice. Please take a look." The middle-aged man didn't even look at the warrant. He said coldly, "How can a member of the Chu family be taken away so easily by the Ministry of Justice? Without His Majesty's imperial edict, I'd like to see who dares to act recklessly in the Chu family." The constable's face showed some difficulty when he heard this. This was the Chu family. The Chu family was different from other family clans. With Grand Tutor Chu present, even the members of the Ministry of Justice could not act too brazenly. Of course, if the Chu family was reasonable, things would naturally go smoothly. If they insisted, they would probably have to seek His Majesty's decree. The constable looked at him and bowed, "If that's the case, we'll take our leave first." After the bailiffs left, the middle-aged man quickly walked up to Grand Tutor Chu and said loudly, "Father, are you going to watch as they take Ping away? Qin Wen is right. The change of dynasties, the rise and fall of clans, these are all fated. How can there be a dynasty that can last for thousands of generations? How can there be a clan that can last forever?" Grand Tutor Chu climbed up from the chair with some effort and murmured, "This old man is really old. When one gets old, it's easy to become confused. Father, I'll leave this matter to you." A few constables walked out of the Chu family's door, but they did not leave. This was because in front of them was a crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. Where is Chu Ping? Why didn't that beast come out? Is it because the Chu family refuses to release him? Before the constables could answer, the crowd had already surged forward. When the Chu family's gatekeeper saw the black mass of people, he was frightened out of his wits and immediately closed the door. Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over the murderer. Return Lady Shuangshuang's innocence. The people inside, listen up. You have been surrounded. Hurry up and hand over Chu Ping. Inside the Chu family, they heard the deafening shouts coming from outside. Even the ground beneath their feet was trembling. The faces of the elders were pale and their hearts were filled with extreme fear. It was not difficult to imagine how many people were outside from the sound and the situation. Once the Chu family's door was breached, the entire Chu family would be razed to the ground. Inside the Chu family's ancestral hall, an elder with white hair and beard faced the memorial tablet of the Chu family ancestor. He knelt on a praying mat as tears streamed down his face. Unfilial descendant, you have brought shame to the Chu family ancestor. In the capital's county government, County Magistrate Liu, who was flipping through the case files, jumped in fright when he heard the voice that resounded throughout the capital. He was caught off guard and the pen in his hand fell to the ground. In the imperial palace, Emingsu put down the memorial and slowly walked out of the hall. She looked at the sky outside the palace walls. What's the situation outside? She seemed to be talking to herself. A female official walked over from the side and said respectfully, "Rest assured, Your Highness. I have already sent the Imperial Guards over. There won't be any trouble." In Hibiscus Garden, Emperor Jing, who was lying on the sickbed, slowly opened his eyes. Changde walked over and closed a window. Grand Tutor Chu, what a pity. Changde narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "His death is not to be regretted for delaying His Majesty's illness." In the Li family, Li Yi covered the little fellow's ears to prevent him from being frightened by the sounds outside. When the first sound had come, it had startled the little fellow who had been taking an afternoon nap. He immediately bawled. It was not easy to coax him back to sleep, but the sounds outside still continued. His hand covered Li Duan's ears, but a hint of melancholy and pity appeared on his face. At this moment, whether inside or outside the capital, no matter what they were doing, almost everyone stopped what they were doing and raised their heads to look at the sky. In the sky, there were birds fleeing in all directions in fright. Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over Chu Ping. The Chu family. The tightly shut doors slowly opened. Everyone was about to rush in when they saw the old man with the cane in front of them. They could not help but take a few steps back. The deafening sounds also gradually quieted down. All of this is my fault. Grand Tutor Chu handed his cane to the servant next to him and slowly knelt in front of the crowd. In a hoarse voice, he said, "I have let down that lady, let down the ancestors of the Chu family, and let down the people of the world. Grandfather, get up. This is not your fault." After a sigh, a figure limped out from the crowd at the back. He walked in front of Grand Tutor Chu and carefully helped him up. He smiled and said, "It's not a good feeling to kneel. You're already so old. Kneeling like this will hurt your legs." Two servants of the Chu family hurriedly helped Grand Tutor Chu. Chu Ping did not even look at the crowd discussing outside the door. He slowly knelt in front of Grand Tutor Chu and heavily kowtowed. "I didn't mean to kill Lady Shuangshuang. However, it's no longer important to say these things now. You've brought me to so many places in the past, seen so many sceneries, and met so many people. I'm really grateful to you." Chu Ping kowtowed again. As he stood up, he said, "Everyone says the capital is good. In the past, when I was outside, I always thought about coming back. Only after coming back did I realize that the capital is actually the most boring place. Thank you. I'm sorry." He stood up and apologized to Grand Tutor Chu. He turned to face the vast crowd outside the Chu family and said loudly, "Everything that I, Chu Ping, have done is my own doing. It has nothing to do with the Chu family." Thud. 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 He knelt down on both knees and heavily kowtowed 3 times to the crowd. After the 3 kowtows, there was no more sound. He knelt there silently. The constable closest to him seemed to have thought of something. He took a step forward and gently pushed him. Chu Ping's body fell sideways. A dagger was stabbed straight into his chest. Fresh blood stained his clothes. Chapter 901. Seeing that young Master Chu was clearly no longer breathing, the constable took 2 steps back with a look of disbelief. There was no end to the exclamations in the crowd. No one expected Chu Ping to be dead. He had chosen to commit suicide in front of so many people. Was this suicide to escape punishment or death to atone for his crimes? Pinger! A middle-aged man rushed out from the Chu family crowd and picked up the corpse on the ground. His face was filled with grief as he wailed out loud. Grand Tutor Chu's body went limp. Fortunately, the Chu family servants behind him supported him, preventing him from falling. After he straightened his body, he waved away the Chu family servants who were supporting him and walked to the constable. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Are you taking his corpse away as well?" The constable immediately took 2 steps back and bowed. The evidence in this case was conclusive. If Chu Ping were still alive, he would naturally be brought to the Ministry of Justice for interrogation. But since he was dead, he had to leave some face for the Chu family. Chu Ping's corpse was brought in and the Chu family's main door slowly closed. The crowd outside stood in front of the Chu family for a long time, but ultimately did not rush in. Pooey! What bullsh*t? Someone spat viciously at the Chu family's main door before turning to leave. Someone said angrily, "Pooey! That old sycophant! Chu Ping is dead. Miss Shuang should rest in peace." Another person sighed and walked a few steps before turning back to face the Chu family's main door. Pooey! On this day, nearly all the citizens of the capital came to the Chu family's front door for a tour. Although everyone had left, the Chu family's front door had become filthy. Even the signboard on the front door had been smashed down. A noble family of a generation had been reduced to such a state overnight. It also made countless officials and nobles in the capital realize how powerful the commoners they usually looked down on were. Chu Ping had committed suicide to atone for his crimes, but the Chu family's matter was not over yet. When Grand Tutor Chu was still a scholar in the Jing kingdom, he had cleansed the emperor's side and admonished the emperor. This was a matter of great moral integrity. But now that his moral integrity had been stripped away, all he had done was to slander the important officials of the court, form a clique for personal gain, harbor evil intentions, and even commit treason such as forcing the emperor to leave the Golden Palace. Moreover, he had harbored criminals and abused his power for personal gain. How could he escape the punishment of the law? Every generation of Grand Tutors had resigned due to old age. Grand Tutor Chu was the only one who had been stripped of his title by the imperial court. Chu Ping's father had also been stripped of his official position. The Chu family's former glory was gone, and no one ever mentioned the title of the scholarly bones of the Jing kingdom. Under the heavy punishment of the court, although the Chu manor was still preserved and the property was not confiscated, the people of Jingdo never saw the tightly closed front door of the Chu family open again. None of the great scholars who had once stood with Grand Tutor Chu said anything about this matter. In reality, it wasn't that they didn't say anything. In the beginning, there were some who spoke out, but before the court could react, they all disappeared because of the public opinion. Chu Ping died and the truth came to light. Lady Shuang's injustice was cleared. The court felt wronged and set up a tomb for her in Jingdo for the people to worship. It also erected a warning monument for the government. The people would forever remember the name Ma Shuang. It was because of her death that the court paid attention to cases of injustice among the people and accelerated the reform of the law. It made the government truly a place to redress the grievances of the people and not a filthy place where those important people abused their power for personal gain. In this process, there were also some things that happened that exceeded everyone's expectations. After the case was concluded, the capital governor Tsing Shichen, who was deeply involved in this case, was restored to his position. Although he was also fined 3 years of his salary, compared to the impact of this case and the Chu family's ending, it was really nothing. The reason was that Lady Shuangshuang's older sister was very protective of this Sir Tsing in court. Although she had been arrested and thrown into the Yaman's prison, from beginning to end, she had not been mistreated or treated unfairly. The Yaman's bailiffs had taken good care of her in prison. Even when she was able to walk to the Ministry of Justice, it was the Yaman's people who escorted her. This clearly didn't make sense. If Tsing Shichen really wanted to seal her mouth, then he should have silenced her as soon as possible. Why did he give her so much preferential treatment? Even when she was being tortured, he played it down and went through the motions. In reality, when a few clever people heard this, they had already figured out the whole story. This Sir Tsang had arrested her and thrown her into prison. It looked like he was persecuting her, but he was actually protecting her. This was because the Chu family's background was very deep. Grand Tutor Chu alone could unite many of the great scholars, and even half of the officials in court to slander a pillar of the court who had made a great contribution to this country. What was a capital governor to them? He couldn't resist the Chu family, so he could only use this method to protect the girl. Otherwise, Lady Shuangshuang's case would probably never be overturned. A loyal official became a sycophant, a clean stream became a dirty stream, an upright official became a treacherous official, and then became an upright official again. Just like these days in the capital, the storm rose and then calmed, and then rose again. The injustice of Do-yi came to an end, and there was a new show in the brothel. The storm had calmed down a bit, and only a few ripples remained, enough to serve as a side dish for the people of the capital. You're talking about that sycophant. In a bun shop, a scholar in a scholarly robe had just spoken when a bun flew from the front and smashed into his face, followed by an angry voice. Who are you calling a sycophant? Say it again. The scholar picked up the bun that had fallen to the ground and looked at the shopkeeper of the bun shop. He said in a daze, I said that Grand Tutor Chu was a scholar, loved and respected by the people, and trusted by the officials. Who would have thought that he would do such a thing to ruin his reputation? It's really, the shopkeeper of the bun shop looked surprised. Ah, you mean that old sycophant. Who else could it be? The owner of the bun shop waved his hand and said awkwardly, Hi, I'm really sorry. I got addicted to smashing you scholars a while ago. It's fine, it's fine. That bun is on me, it's free. The Chu family has now completely declined. No one in the capital is willing to have anything to do with them. After the reform of the law, the pressure on the government has increased a lot. Fortunately, after that period of busyness, the pressure has lessened a lot. Most cases are actually not that complicated, and it's not every day that there's a case of injustice. Without Grand Tutor Chu leading the way, that matter can be considered to have completely calmed down. Mingzu looked at Li Yi and sighed. It's finally over. After a long time without receiving a response, she extended her hand and waved it in front of Li Yi's eyes. Li Yi came back to his senses and asked, what did you just say? Mingzu looked at him and finally waved her hand. Nothing, how is this the end? Li Yi shook his head. He lifted the curtain of the carriage and said, This is just the beginning. He jumped down from the carriage and walked towards a building in front of him. It was an ancestral hall. In the ancestral hall, there was a stone tablet. The people of the capital lined up like flowing water. After placing an incense stick in front of the stone tablet, they left through the other side. Li Yi lined up and placed an incense stick in front of the stone tablet. He then stood to the side for a while before walking out. Mingzu was still standing next to the carriage, looking at another carriage. A green-clothed manservant walked over from that side. He bowed and said respectfully, "My master invites you over." Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Who is your master?" "You'll know when you get there, my lord." Li Yi looked at the carriage that was parked in the corner and walked towards it. As he walked to the side of the carriage, the curtain was lifted by a withered hand, revealing a face covered in wrinkles. The old man seemed to have aged another 10 years since the last time he had seen him. Li Yi cupped his hands and said, "Grand Tutor, long time no see." Behind the curtain, the old man looked at him emotionlessly and said in a hoarse voice, "You once asked me if it was worth it. For my own selfishness, I buried the entire Chu clan. It was indeed not worth it." He shook his head, his eyes suddenly becoming sharp. "But the eldest imperial son returning to the capital to inherit the throne is natural. Have you ever thought about what you are doing? What you are doing is worth it. Just what do you want?" He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Prince Jin is young and you have no contact with the other princes. Tell me, just what do you want?" Li Yi looked at him and slowly asked, "Grand Tutor, do you really want to know?" Grand Tutor Chu said nothing and only stared fixedly at him. "Since Grand Tutor wants to know." Li Yi shook his head and walked into the carriage. Grand Tutor Chu leaned forward. He moved his head closer and whispered, "I won't tell you." Chapter 902. As the carriage drove past, there was a violent cough coming from inside. Mingsu turned back to look at Li Yi. "What did you say to Grand Tutor?" Li Yi shook his head. "Nothing." Mingsu looked at the carriage in front again. The coughing gradually faded away. She continued to look at him with a look that said, "Do you believe me?" "I swear on the honor of a sycophant." Li Yi raised 4 fingers. "I really didn't say anything to him." The main reason for the Chu family's demise was not the Chui family. Under normal circumstances, the 2 crimes that Chu Ping had committed, according to the previous laws of the Jing kingdom, were nothing more than a high-class person killing a low-class person and having to pay some silver taels. Even Chu Ping himself might not be severely punished. The real reason was Grand Tutor Chu. From his inaction in the beginning, or his shielding, to his worsening later, Grand Tutor Chu could not turn back, nor could the Chu family. All of this was caused by Grand Tutor Chu, who cherished his reputation and was extremely famous. The Chu family rose because of its reputation, and was also dragged down by it. It was a century-old family that had fallen to such a state. He had once asked Grand Tutor Chu whether it was worth it or not. Grand Tutor Chu did not answer, but gave the answer with his actions. But no matter what, this old man was once prominent and was still watched by countless people. If he was told that the king of Shu was not his majesty's biological son, and that he wanted Mingsu to be the empress, Grand Tutor Chu might have a heart attack or a brain hemorrhage. If he was not careful, he would not be able to clear his name. The 2 did not get on the carriage again, but walked back. When they were about to walk past the ancestral hall, 2 figures walked toward them. The middle-aged man walking in front raised his head and was slightly stunned. He immediately cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, Lord Li." Mingsu turned back to look at Li Yi, the doubt in her eyes obvious. "Qin He, the 5th son of Prime Minister Qin." Li Yi explained to her, then looked at 5th Master Qin and pointed at his hair, his eyes full of doubt. "Oh, about that." 5th Master Qin smiled and said, "I'm old, so I'm not like you young people." Li Yi nodded and then slightly cupped his hands. "Thank you, Prime Minister Qin, for dealing with the matters in the court recently. Please thank him on my behalf. I will personally visit him another day to thank him. My father is only doing what he thinks is right. We can't say anything." 5th Master Qin shook his head and said, "However, I will convey Lord Li's message." Li Yi looked at the ancestral hall behind him and asked, did you also come to pay your respects to Lady Shuangshuang? Fifth Master Qin nodded and said, although Lady Shuangshuang is no longer here, her death is meaningful. There are so many people who remember her, and there are countless people who are deeply grateful to her. Her death alone accomplished something that the entire court could not do. It is worthy of worship. On the way back, Mingsu looked at him and asked, is he Qin He, the Qin He that Uncle Wang mentioned? What, he doesn't look like him. She shook her head and said, I just feel that a person who is worthy of Uncle Wang's evaluation shouldn't be like this. Don't be fooled by this fifth master of the Qin clan's sloppy appearance. Li Yi smiled and said, he's a truly powerful person. In the ancestral hall, after the two of them burned incense in front of the stone tablet, they entered the ancestral hall. As soon as they entered, they saw a statue of a woman the size of a normal person. Below the statue was a spacious platform. After people burned incense outside, they would place the things they brought to pay their respects on this platform. The burly man asked mysteriously, Fifth Master, the person beside Lord Li just now was the princess. What, do I not look like her? Fifth Master Qin casually asked as he placed a plate of pastries in the box on the platform. To be honest, she doesn't look like her. The burly man nodded. Just as he was wondering why he hadn't noticed before, he suddenly heard a cracking sound. He turned his head to look at Fifth Master beside him and said in surprise, Fifth Master, where did you get the apple in your hand? Fifth Master Qin casually pointed to the fruit plate on the platform that was clearly missing an apple. There, it tastes pretty good. Do you want it? This. The burly man looked at him in disbelief. This was given to Lady Shuangshuang by someone else. Fifth Master, you, Shuangshuang. Fifth Master Qin shook his head and said, she doesn't like eating apples. It's a waste to keep it. Crack. Another sound. What are you doing over there? At this moment, there were still many people in the ancestral hall. When someone raised his head and saw this scene, he immediately stood up in anger. You even dare to eat something given to Lady Shuangshuang. Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? What, who did it? Take them to the officials. The burly man grabbed an apple and grabbed Fifth Master Qin's arm. He hurriedly said, what are you waiting for? Run. A moment later, in an alley in Jingdo, Fifth Master Qin panted heavily. He patted a footprint on his body and asked, what? How is this apple? The burly man took a bite and nodded. It's crispy and sweet. Why doesn't Lady Shuangshuang like it? Fifth Master Qin leaned against the wall and sighed. Yes, I also don't understand why she doesn't like it. He was silent for a moment. After waiting for the burly man to finish eating the apple, he said, Wu Er, how long have you been following me? The burly man froze for a moment. In the next moment, he threw away the apple and clapped his hands. Solemnly, he said, Fifth Master, tell me, what do you want me to do this time? Go follow the little Duke and see what he's been doing these days. I'm the best at following people. The burly man patted his chest. With me doing things, Fifth Master can rest assured. The trail is broken. Li Yi sighed and said, how could it be broken? Lu Yi shook his head and said, the Ministry of Justice and the Secret Intelligence Bureau couldn't find anything. The person behind this case must have great power in Jingdo. Li Yi rubbed the space between his brows and suddenly felt a headache coming on. He tilted his head to look at the princess and said helplessly, now there's only the Chui family left. Why don't we choose another path? Mingsu looked at him and asked in confusion, what path? I know a path that leads directly to the central lake of the Academy of Mathematics. If we go at night, we'll definitely not be discovered. Why don't we take advantage of the darkness and wind, sink the Chui family into the lake? You also think this is a good idea, right? It's simple, convenient, and saves time. Do you want me to help you kidnap Consort Chui out of the palace? If you can help, that would be great. Li Yi met her eyes. Lu Yi quickly looked out the window. A moment later, Li Yi shook his head and said, "Forget it. It's dark and I can't see the road clearly. Let's think about it at length. If the Chui family could be taken down so easily, father wouldn't have waited until now." Mingzi shook her head and said, 20 years ago, their power had already seeped into every corner of the imperial court. They also have a good reputation among the people. Although they are not as powerful as before, they still have a foundation that cannot be underestimated. Li Yi sighed and said, "That's why I said it's more convenient to choose another path." Fong strode in from outside and handed him an envelope. He said, "Young master, there's news from Wu'er." Li Yi opened the envelope and looked at it. He handed it to Lu Yi and said with a smile, "Isn't it connected now?" Chapter 903. Li Yi handed the letter to Lu Yishui and said, "Keep an eye on Qin Yu. You should be able to find something." Lu Yishui took the letter and looked at it. He nodded and said, "I understand." Mingzu seemed to understand what he wanted to do. When she walked into the courtyard, she turned around and asked, "Are you going to deal with the Chui family the same way you dealt with the Chu family?" The Chui family has many henchmen. They won't do many things themselves. As long as the matter of the king of Shu is not exposed, unless the Chui family is plotting a rebellion, it won't have much impact on the general situation. Li Yi shook his head and said, "Let's take one step at a time. A dam of 1,000 miles will collapse because of an ant's nest. If we add up all the things one by one, it might be the last straw that breaks the camel's back." Mingzhu's tone was firm. "We can't let father know about that matter no matter what." "Of course I know that. Otherwise, the Chui family will die countless times for this crime." Li Yi had thought about this contradiction many times. It was obvious that it was easy to destroy the Chui family through that matter, but it was easier to destroy the old emperor. They couldn't take this risk. The two reached a tacit understanding on this matter. There was nothing to discuss. Li Yi saw Mississippi Lu on the other side of the courtyard. She seemed to have just finished practicing. He thought for a moment and waved his hand. "Rui, come here for a moment." Mississippi Lu put down autumn water and walked over. She cast an inquiring look at him. Li Yi looked at the two standing together. After a moment, he looked at Mississippi Lu and said in surprise, "I find that you have been growing recently. I remember that you were shorter than the princess at the beginning. Now you are the same height." Mississippi Lu looked at him. "When have I ever been shorter than her?" "Ah, you didn't." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Then I must have remembered wrongly again. I don't know what happened to my memory recently." Li Yi walked the princess out the door and saw sister-in-law Fang walking over from afar. When he saw the person beside her, he was instantly stunned. He closed his eyes in disbelief, and when he opened them again, sister-in-law Fang was already talking to the woman beside her with a smile. Li Yi looked back at Mississippi Lu and asked, "Who's the girl next to Mrs. Fang? I've never seen her before." Mississippi Lu looked in that direction and said, "Yesterday, when Aunt Fang went to the temple to offer incense, she met Miss Xiao on the road. Miss Xiao came to the capital to seek shelter with her relatives, but she couldn't find her and was robbed of her traveling expenses. Aunt Fang pitied her and temporarily took her in." "Miss Xiao." Li Yi nodded and sighed. Sister-in-law Fang is really kind. Sister-in-law Fang actually treats people very well, and Uncle Fang is also not bad. It's just that he looks a little fierce usually. Li Yi nodded. "Speaking of which, you two are quite similar, but you don't know how to use a broom when you fight, which is much better than her." Mississippi Lu's temper had really improved recently, and Li Yi couldn't help but feel that his youth was gone forever. She could even cook a bowl of noodles that tasted pretty good by herself. The unruly, willful, unreasonable, and unworldly Mississippi Lou seemed to be gone forever. Of course, the person who made him feel that time could change a person the most was Fong. He had quietly sent sister-in-law Fong's biggest enemy to her side, and the two of them could get along with each other like sisters. There was harmony inside and outside the house. Li Yi didn't think he had the ability to do so. Some things have to be faced. I don't have the ability of the son-in-law, so of course I have to find another way. When Fong said this, his face was shrouded in a sacred glow. For him, this was indeed a big deal. To be able to let sister-in-law Fong and Little Red get along like sisters, this was simply a fantasy, unbelievable, and something that he didn't even dare to think about in the past. In contrast, his own affairs were more difficult to deal with. Although drunk Mo's tone had relaxed these days, it seemed that she was still not completely mentally prepared. And this was just drunk Mo. The road was long, and the revolution had not yet succeeded. Comrades still needed to work hard. In the old house of the Xing family, drunk Mo helped them make tea. When they walked back to the room, Xing Shichen said, "After this incident, the Chui family probably doesn't trust me much anymore." This did not come as a surprise to Li Yi. That case involved a lot of people, and it was the focus of the entire capital. Removing him from it would undoubtedly be a hell of a challenge. One careless move and it would cause a wave of public opinion. When the Chui family knew that they couldn't protect the Chu family, they had actually used the power of the court to protect him, the capital governor. However, they encountered great obstacles, and in the end, they had no choice but to stop. In this way, the subsequent reversal of public opinion seemed extremely suspicious. With the protection of that girl, if the Chui family still didn't suspect them, they would have been eaten up in the capital. Although the king of Shu is still in Shuzhou, as long as His Majesty doesn't appoint a crown prince, he is still the most promising. Xing Shichen looked at him and said slowly, "Once something happens to His Majesty, the king of Shu will inherit the throne. This is almost without a doubt. Until now, are you still not willing to tell me which side you are on? Although the Chui family probably won't do anything to you, you still have to be careful." Li Yi didn't answer. He just warned him and turned to go inside. A thoughtful look appeared on Xing Shichen's face. After a moment, he dipped his finger in the tea and wrote 2 words on the table. Soon, he crossed out the 2 words, Prince Jean, on the stone table. In the situation where His Majesty still had adult princes, the possibility of a child inheriting the throne was too small. For the sake of the overall situation, His Majesty would not make such a choice. On this point, Li Yi definitely knew better than he did. As for the other princes, whether it was status or talent, they were far inferior. More importantly, those princes were far away in their fiefdoms, and Li Yi had no contact with them. Apart from Prince Jean, among the princes, there was not a single one who had both a high status and a close relationship with him. However, he had a close relationship with the princesses. She had offended the king of Shu for Princess Yongning, causing the Chui family to see him as a thorn in their side. Princess Shaning was also very close to him, and there was no barrier when they got along. As for the eldest princess, needless to say, it was said that they were close friends when they were in Qing and Prefecture. In the past few years in the capital, the eldest princess established the Women's College and the Women's Union. She was deeply loved by the women in the capital, and founded the academy, which won the hearts of the scholars in the world. Ever since she took over the government, all the civil and military officials in the court would praise the eldest princess when they mentioned her. There were countless officials in the court who were as loyal to her as they were to His Majesty. Who would still dare to treat her as a woman? Not to mention, great scholar Chu's actions backfired and he lost the hearts of the people. Her Highness reformed the law, which was also applauded by the people. Behind all these things, there was actually his shadow. It was strange that he didn't know what he was thinking. Instead of supporting a prince, he spared no effort to do these things for the eldest princess. What was he thinking? Sing Shichen picked up the teacup and put it down again, the expression on his face frozen. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.